the winter time. A lot of like, dead trees and gray skies. And so it's nice to see like the sky and like the greenery. You really appreciate it, like the outdoors, when you kind of live in a place like the Midwest, because you kind of you have both good weather and bad weather.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that cold here where I live. It's that my house has got big rooms. There's no thermal. It's a cool house. It's built for summer, for the beach. So, and I keep the windows open. I keep the windows open for fresh air. So I just hack the cold because I actually enjoy feeling a bit of coolness. So like the inside and outside temperatures aren't not such a big difference. That makes sense.
Yeah.
We just gone live. Hello and welcome to those of you that will be joining us and are joining us. Sending much love, peace, harmony, blessings, respect. And yeah, man, we're going to be discussing the religion of science worn as wool over the eyes.
Really wordy title.
It took me a while to come up with that one.
Yeah.
I wanted to have the wool in there because it's like we've been taken out to pasture by the pastor, right? So the pastor takes you out to pasture and leads you up the garden path, right? And basically has you following trends like sheep, and all of us trends like sheep. So I think this is going to be a fun discussion. Starting off, we've got a few people that are going to be coming in just in a little while. So give them a few minutes. Let me make sure I've sent all the links out. I should have. My phone, unless there's been an issue. I'd just like to double check. Yep, it did send. Because I've had issues with my phone going on to the internet for some reason. But I updated my software, so I'm sure my Samsung's back to normal. My banking app's doing all sorts of nonsense, weird stuff. So yeah, welcome to all of you that are joining us retrospectively as well. Sending much love, peace, harmony, respect. Today we're starting off. It's myself here. I'm the shaman. That's my thing. Initiated into Western occults and Vedic schools of yoga and tantra and Kendra and certain kinds of Shiva devotion and Vedic schools of thought as well. So, and Kabbalah, of course, being central to the Western occultism. And who we've got here starting off with us is the Cosmic Prankster. He's a fascinating character. We're going to be doing a live this coming week. Looking forward to that. He's going to be unveiling he's going to be unveiling an introduction to his system. I don't think he's fully finished it yet. It's a work in progress.
Oh, it's gonna keep going. Like there's kind of almost no end to it. So basically, I feel like with the entities that are sort of channeling, I'm basically at the intermediate level. I haven't even gotten to the advanced level yet. So it's like math. It's like you start with arithmetic, then you go into subtraction, then multiplication and division. And then you get into like the complex, like trigonometry and calculus. And yeah, Zarfexology is kind of like that. It's starting to get a little bit more mathematical in terms of like numbers and like ratios and percentages.
So for those of you that don't know, Cosmic is channeling his own system of occult therapeutics, philosophy, and practice with the Fae. And it's an entire system from the ground up. He speaks about Zarfexology, I believe, is like a nickname. It's developed over the time because it's all about the Zarfexes. That's what these states of being are called. So he's got some interesting ideas, and it's actually a lot of his ideas are going to be quite applicable in this conversation because physics, biology, physiology, chemistry, right? They've all been. How can I put this? Right, Darwinian theory. We're definitely going to go into that, right? Like we evolved from apes, right? Is that the story? Did Darwin not count the chromosomes? Oh no, he couldn't count the chromosomes, could he? Was it in the 1950s that those two blokes discovered the double helix and all of the 33 pairs of chromosomes? I believe the double helix was discovered in the 50s, 1950 something.
Watson and Crick, I believe, discovered the double helix.
Exactly. And before then, we didn't know that much about the DNA. But now we know that apes have got 34 pairs of chromosomes. Isn't that interesting? Sorry,
Mhm.
24 pairs of chromosomes. So they've got 48 chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes. There's a little bit of a calculation issue there. And people will say, yeah, well, there was this study done on lizards where they discovered that lizards that mixed with other variety of lizards had a different chromosome count, and they were able to track it. And I'm like, yeah. So they had like what, 5 groups of scientists working on this, and they were able to track it in what, 2 years? Right. We've had thousands of scientists trying to prove Darwin's theory, and they haven't found the connection yet. Come on. That lizard story doesn't hold any water when you compare it to the human condition. And there's actually been a lot of somebody won the Nobel Prize in 2022 because of their work, the black box. What's that guy's name? Where he actually shows mechanically through mechanical chemistry that it's very unlikely and almost impossible that Darwinian theory can exist. And there have been Nobel Prizes handed out for the science that this guy has done with regards to this work, even in the popular community. And I believe his work was cited by like 3,000 other peer-reviewed papers. Obviously, he's peer-reviewed, so it's an official theory. And he was cited in 3,000 something odd other peer-reviewed papers. So you're going to find people telling you the Darwin theory has been proved in science. That's hogwash. That's hocus pocus. Physics, there were 2 camps. There was Boyle's camp and there was Einstein's camp. Einstein has been shot out of the water with a cannon. Pow! He was shot out of the water with a cannon when they discovered quantum entanglement because he didn't believe it existed. So Newtonian theory, hello, where are we going with it? Welcome. We've got Indy Sage here. Indy Sage is a shadow working helper. He assists people to integrate their shadows, to locate their shadow, the repressed complexes, parts of themselves they couldn't face, were too afraid to face, helps them bring that into perspective and reintegrate parts of the personality that had been lost to the avenues of the past due to life circumstances, and to produce a wholeness of being and a wholeness of brain and mind and presence. Welcome, dear Indy. I'd love you both to say a few words.
All right, can you hear me okay? It might be a little spotty.
We can hear you good.
My video. So, all right, good. I do shadow work, and it's the joy of my life and my passion. I was able to gain self-mastery after a near-death experience through Jungian shadow work after I decided to stop sweating the small stuff and go into the darkness with my light. It was a point in my life where I pivoted from blaming other people for my problems, and I started to take responsibility for my own issues. I took my self-mastery back into my own hands, and I was able to, unfortunately, had to go through the dark night of the soul, but it was well worth it in the end. And the payoff of integration with my shadow, I'll do it 100 times over. So I like to be able to provide that guidance to others, and I use the Jungian shadow work modality, usually the masculine technique, as opposed to the feminine technique, where you actually go through your roots of your triggers and kind of a rational process and be able to provide forgiveness and love to those that were previously blamed, and then offer oneself self-forgiveness and self-love. And after that point, one can then thank the people who they previously blamed for strengthening them. And this pivot from having this animosity towards others, towards gaining personal responsibility for yourself and then offering love towards those others who you previously hated, provides an amazing transformation in your heart. And it can go from being that heavy weight that holds you down to feeling like that weight has been lifted from your chest and you're a new person. And it comes with the dissolving of inner turmoil, and it provides great inner peace when it's done right. And of course, you have to have the right spiritual tools and a good support network to engage in the process. But as far as the subject today, this is something that I have been passionate about for decades. And I am actually a proponent of what most people have never heard of in science. Lamar.
Could you say that again? You got kind of cut off there. So go back to
it's called
what
Lamarckian
was
theory.
Marsican theory?
Lamarckian. Lamarck.
Lamarckian.
Yes. And Lamarck believed that the traits we use become more pronounced, whereas the traits that we do not use become less pronounced and eventually become vestigial. This theory was thrown out when they found that babies are born, females are born with all of their eggs already genetically determined. So when they threw this Lamarckian theory out, they failed to realize that it might be the case that the grandmother influences her granddaughter's eggs because they're created in her womb. So there might be like a generational skip. So the type of Lamarckian theory that I'm a proponent of, I call weak Lamarckian theory, because the strong Lamarckian theory suggested that what we now call epigenetics takes place. And so even though we know that epigenetics takes place, we still haven't been able to explain for a while that the genetics are going to change. Even though they had been predetermined at birth, the genetics can also change from behaviors during one's lifetime of the eggs that a woman carries in her womb, in her ovaries. So now weak Lamarckian theory and epigenetics can bring us back to a place where Lamarckian theory can be more feasible in understanding evolution. We see this very, very common when people like for go to work out and become muscular. The more stronger, the more you work on it. I feel that is the same with a lot of things. When you start to hone in on a certain trait, offer the body the building blocks that it needs, and then use that trait more, it can become more pronounced, and it could become more capable. And so I feel like this theory has been shut down for us, because if we know that epigenetics is real and that if we do something bad, it can pass that bad thing onto our children, but we fail to realize that if we do something good, we can also pass that down onto our children. So if we follow the idea that nothing we does matters, there's really not much of an incentive to work out, be in good mental health, or anything like that, because it won't be passed down to the children according to Darwinian theory. It's just a random type of like chaos that leads to new according to their theory. And so with that kind of line of thinking, it doesn't really provide incentive for people to work on their own personal health. It doesn't provide any incentive that if you do, that will be passed down to your children. But we know through epigenetics, meaning high genetics, is now being brought into peer-reviewed studies and is well established even in science. So just like Einstein wanted to assert predeterminism or fatalism and suggested that everything can be predicted if we understand the breakdown of the different atoms and their correspondence. When we found out about quantum entanglement, he realized that there's something here that's going on that's going to make it so that things are not as predictable as we had considered. Things are much different than we thought. So as fatalism was thrown out, I feel like Darwinism is also being thrown out. But in a similar way, we have this old anthropological view of the Serengeti evolutionary theory. We had to stand up tall over the tall grasses. That's technically been thrown out as well, because they found out that the place where they thought we evolved in tall grass was actually a jungle during that period of time. And so a lot of these theories, even though they don't stand up anymore, are still being published in textbooks. So we have to really start to consider these things now that we know better. And it's the golden age of information. So if you do your own research, you'll start to see through a lot of these lies pretty quick.
So I wanted to touch up on go on. You have thought to finish there.
I hope my sound's not too scratchy.
Yeah, you were breaking up a bit when you were talking.
It's better.
Now.
It's better now.
Good.
So
Yeah, we
anyway,
have
I
bad
kind
weather
of
here
wanted
today. It's a bit rainy.
to touch up on what on Bush Whisperer talking about evolution. Now, I think when it comes to science, if we want to talk about science, we have to talk about the sort of the metaphysical orientation that it's based around, which is materialism. And the thing about evolution is that I don't necessarily disagree with the theory of evolution, but I don't really believe in the way, because there's a different context. You can look at evolution in different ways. You can look at it in this purely mechanistic, atheistic, random way, but I would consider myself a proponent of intelligent evolution, a sense of um, life evolving, but with an actual purpose and conscious intent. And that what the thing about Darwinian evolution is that it's the idea that nature is devoid of purpose. It's godless, it's random, it lacks consciousness. And this is why I think if you add panpsychism to evolution, it completely changes the whole narrative, like just flips it upside down. And now you see how, like, I'll think of one of the things that's been fascinating with is the idea that crystals are sort of the middle ground or the missing link between organic and inorganic matter. So between rocks and cells and stuff like that, crystals, it sort of, and I think if you kind of look back at that, you just see it as lower and lower levels of sentience, as opposed to the materialist point of view that says, oh, everything is completely devoid of sentience, completely devoid of consciousness. And then when the atoms got into just the right configuration, consciousness just magically spurted out of nowhere. This is called I think it's the emergent property phenomenon. But here's one thing that I've always been curious about with materialism, is that materialists have no problem with the assertion that consciousness is a physical phenomenon, but they deny that physical phenomenon has consciousness. So it's like the consciousness is physical, but the physical isn't consciousness. That's just a straight up contradiction right there. And so that, to me, like that is why, like, you know, when it comes to consciousness, I think that's the problem with science, is that it doesn't include a conscious universe as one of the variables. It doesn't say that consciousness is fundamental. Consciousness, according to mainstream science, is some like arbitrary offshoot that just happened to, like, just like some little weed that grew in an obscure planet, but most of the universe is just, you know, blind and unintelligent, and, you know, it's just like basically like billiard balls bouncing off of each other with no real, you know, But even if you think about a billiard ball and you think about like objects bouncing off of each other, there's a kind of consciousness in that. I think I remember Alan Watts talking about how like the ringing of a bell is like consciousness at a very, very simplified and minute level. So if you think about like when a ball interacts with another ball, it knows that there's a reaction to bounce in the opposite direction. There's a sort of consciousness within that. And so for me, intelligent evolution is starting from that very basic form of consciousness, and then having it kind of become, you know, grow and expand, become more specialized, become more complexified. So to me, it's like I don't throw away evolution. It's just that I think Darwinian evolution has a big piece in the puzzle that it's missing. And that's my take on that.
I love what you guys have said so far. I was just about to try and record something in the background while you were talking to shoot it out onto Telegram, let people know that we're running live. There's been so much said already. I don't know where to start, but I'm going to start with the Lamarckian theory, which was one of the first things mentioned. And I like that, Indy, that you brought that up. Now, what's happened to Indy? Where is he? Oh, there he is. Sorry, Indy, you fell off. I was just saying that I love that Indy brought up the Lamarckian theory as a start, because I think that's very, very relevant. And how the materialism attitude towards life, which I believe started with Einstein, and we'll get into, well, it started with Newton, but Einstein picked up the hammer and swung it and put the proverbial nails in the coffin of science. And I think Einstein did as much damage to science as what he did good. And that is if he wasn't a plagiarist that was plagiarizing other people's theories, because it seems when you look into history that a lot of the theories that Einstein got credit for, he didn't come up with them. They were around before him. He was just merely citing them as his own work, which doesn't seem integrous to me. But without getting into that whole bag of eggs argument, just what is under the label of Einstein being brought into science, I think there was as much harm done as there was good, because there was good done. We got a lot of insight from, understanding, looking at photons in this way, standardizing light speed for certain effects, and studying and for developing technology. There was uses in Einstein's theory. And sometimes one can get the right reaction when one doesn't really understand what one's doing. That's really fundamentally important to realize. Sometimes we can stumble upon technology thinking that the technology is coming from a particular theory and take that as proof for the theory, but it just happens to be working because of something we weren't aware of that happens to cause it to work for a different reason than what we thought it was working. So the fact that technology exists from these theories doesn't prove that the theories are infallible, just as a start. But getting back to what you mentioned about Lamarckian theory, I think it's fundamentally understood by breeders of dogs, breeders of plants, that you have the genome and the phenome, right? And the genotype is what you inherit from your parents. But the phenotype, that's conditional. And so, as an example, I was explaining on a previous live that I can take a female cannabis plant and I can turn a part of that female cannabis plant into a male plant, affecting its epigenetics using merely colloidal silver. So it just gives you an idea of how malleable the so-called genotype is. And all breeders understand phenotypes. They talk about it. If you're breeding horses, if you're breeding plants, if you're breeding to breed for high quality, whatever it is you're breeding, whether it's food plants, whether it's fruit or animals, you have to understand how the phenotypes operate, because the phenotypes are going to affect the outcome as much as the genotype. And how you trigger phenotypes are with conditions. So with plants, the temperatures, the humidity, the VPD, vapor pressure deficit, and how you manage the cycles between light and dark, and all of these factors have a huge effect on the phenotype, to the point that it's possible to take a cannabis plant and make it turn purple by the way that you grow it, because it has within the genotype the potential for purple, but it's not going to come out unless you trigger the phenotype, which is in itself evidence for this Lamarckian theory, in my opinion. But once again, we can't count on it absolutely. But what we can say is that when certain proponents of science said it was wrong, they weren't right. And here's the interesting thing about right and wrong when it comes to physics and science and biochemistry. You have a certain group of people, a certain camp that has been given the stage, and the other camp has been led off the stage and put on the sideline. So we're all hearing from one half of the group. Science has never been fixed. It has never been consistent. Let's go back to the beginning of physics for a moment. And before we do that, what Cosmic said, I loved it. Crystals have consciousness. I want to write a book on crystals because I'm so disgusted at what's in print about crystals. It's treated like it's mechanical science. There's nothing mechanical in the science about crystals. There is genotypes and phenotypes at work within crystals. Okay, it's not genotypes and phenotypes the way we know it with genetic codes, but conditions have effects on the stone. How you charge the stone, what you do to the stone, where you place the stone, what other stones are talking to that stone affects the vibrational frequency of the stone. So I think crystals are a really intelligent way of looking at this discussion, because we have crystalline cells on our eyes and crystalline cells in our pineal glands. And these two crystalline cells react to and generate light, which is really interesting. So there is light being generated inside our heads. They don't talk about this in physics. They don't talk about this because it's a physics phenomenon, right? As well as a biochemistry, as well as what do you call it? Not biology, but physiology. It's also a physiological science element, which isn't taught to us. But these cells in our pineal gland are the same cells that fishes under the sea have that produce light, neon light. And we have the same cells on our eyes. We all know that watching a sunrise has a profound effect on our state of mind, on our consciousness, on our mood, on our ability to think cognitively, on our memory, on our concentration levels. So, we know that melatonin is affected by the light's exposure to the eyes, but they don't really go into detail with letting us know why and what, because when we start looking at this, why was quantum entanglement only proved recently? Quantum entanglement has been on the table since the 50s, right? Since the 30s, since the 1930s, they've been trying to bring back the ether. So science, one half group of scientists decided that ether doesn't exist. This was Newtonian. They said, no, ether's, it's hogwash. But it wasn't unanimous. Half the scientists were discovering, hold on, there's something there. We can't pretend it's not there. But they didn't get the stage. The stage was given to Newtonian cronies. And Einstein, being a very intelligent man, signed up to the Newtonian crony crew because he knew that's the way he's going to get the stage. Does he want to be famous? Does he want to be a profound thinker? I mean, we're told that Einstein was such an amazing human being. He might have been, but the stories of how he abused his wife are also out there in the historical canon. So who knows what's the truth about Einstein? Was he a narcissist that was really good at impressing people, but actually when he was at home with his wife, he was something else? The story of what his wife had to say about him were very contradictory to what we know in the popular community about Einstein. So there are a lot of question marks. And obviously he was a champion for materialism. So this started with Bohr. Bohr and Einstein had two different camps, right? Bohr was basically suggesting that the universe is not real. And Einstein was suggesting that the universe was real. And when I say not real, I mean that it wasn't a set of fixed mechanical processes, where Einstein was suggesting that the universe is a fixed set of mechanical processes that are predetermined at the creation of the particles. And so he determined that these different spins of the particles would be predetermined at the creation of these particles. And these particles would be created in sets. And when they're created in sets, their spins would be predetermined. That was Einstein's idea. And that there was no such thing as quantum entanglement, right? Well, we've disproved that. So we really need to question everything that Einstein brought to us, because a lot of his theories were based on this premise. So how do we keep a lot of his theories when the initial premise behind his most fundamental concepts relating to the physics of the time-space have been proved wrong? But still, here we go, chanting the Einstein name. So there's this, obviously we're talking about angular momentum and spin, right? And Bohr, who also had a lot of support in the scientific community, had the other camp that suggested that reality was responsive to consciousness, which is exactly what Cosmic was saying. So in the 30s, this war between the two camps started. And the camp that was chosen by the editorial press, by the stage that gets exposure into the popular media, was Einstein's camp. So everybody was brainwashed into believing their theories, much of which has been proved wrong. This is why Darwinism became so popular, because the ideas of this materialistic attitude towards life, that it's just a mechanical universe. It's like Cosmic said, it's just running like cogs. There's no intelligence, there's no purpose, there's no divinity. Well, Bohr and his camp believed actually the observer affects the nature of reality, and that reality is based upon the observation of reality, which is actually leaving a lot of room for consciousness, right? But this was done away with by Einstein, and it was explained that there's this something of the nature which is similar to quantum entanglement, which is once again re-echoing the ancient idea of of the ether. Now, the ether has been around since the time of the Greeks. Actually, no. They put it on the map as we know it, but it's been around for much longer. And the ether is a very interesting concept to look at because it is essentially quantum entanglement. The ether represents a subspace where there is a connectivity between other points in time and space, and that subspace is undetectable and unseen, but it is a subspace network that connects everything else, and that all of matter as we know it is emerging from this subspace ether principle, right? Quantum entanglement is that there is a subspace series of networks, a subspace network connecting all atoms and all particles and all points in time space to other points in time space, and that matter as we know it is emerging from the event horizon of this quantum entanglement process. If that's not the exact verbatim definition, why have we called it quantum entanglement? Why could the scientists not admit that we had done away with ether incorrectly in the 1800s? Why could it not be acknowledged that Newton was wrong? My belief is that because so much is resting upon Newton's theories. And when you start to go into his most fundamental premise and find it completely wrong, you've got to start questioning everything else that came. It would cause people to question the nature of physics as it's been taught in textbooks, like basically 70% of it, because it's all based on this nonsense. And the same can be said for evolutional psychology and evolutional biochemistry. There is also, to mention, what was his name? I wrote it down somewhere. Oh yeah, Dr. Michael J. Behe. He did a piece on this black box. I mentioned it before. I found where I'd written it down. So he did a paper, which is a theory, which is peer-reviewed, mostly. So it's accepted physics. I mean, it's accepted biochemistry in the popular biochemistry field. And he, according to the biochemical challenge of evolution, that's what the paper is called. Now, this paper basically challenges Darwinian theory and basically debunks it effectively. But if you go into Google, Google says that he didn't have enough evidence. Okay. He didn't have enough evidence to absolutely debunk it. Will one ever have enough evidence to absolutely debunk anything? But what is interesting is that there are 3,080 citations on his peer-reviewed article in other peer-reviewed articles. What does this tell you? The popular biochemistry research departments out there are giving his theories credence because they are citing his theory in their theories. And there are 3,080 other theories that are citing his theory. So it's not just some guy came up with a theory. There's a whole group of biochemists out there that are actually buying into this idea. And these are the experts in the field, so-called, as we're to know it and understand it. They've got more expertise than most of us. They may have been brainwashed by the system, but many of them may have their hearts in the job. So there's a lot of credence when we look at his work with the black box, even though you'll find that Google will tell you it's not true. The same, like, you just can't trust Google because Google's basically a blatant liar. So there are a lot of questions here that need to be answered. And I love what the way you put it, Cosmic, about this mechanical world without God in it. And I'm using the word God not like a bloke on a throne with a wand who's jealous of other gods. I'm not talking that nonsense. When I say the word God, I mean intelligent design, the presence of a intelligence that is pervasive within the universe. And that exact way that Cosmic so beautifully put it, that gravity can only exist if there is intelligence. Because how do different substances remember to be affected by gravity according to their specific density? How does electromagnetism work? How does light polarize if there isn't an inherent intelligence within light? I think, Cosmic, that was beautifully put. And welcome back, Indy, brother. I hope your audio is running.
Since we're on the subject of science as being like a religion, I think I kind of want to get into how the actual indoctrination process actually works, because I think a lot of people kind of get this confused because it doesn't work like traditional religious cults. Now, if we take like a traditional religious cult, let's say like a Christian cult, for example, the idea is that this is the infallible word of God. It can't be questioned. And if you're going to question it, you will be severely punished. Science almost works in the opposite way. Science basically says that it's you can question it, you can change your mind, but the way the real indoctrination works is that basically instead of saying you can't question it, it's more so that these experts, these people who have the white lab coats, they're questioning it, so you don't have to question it yourself. And so the idea is it creates a kind of creative and intellectual complacency. It's like, well, I'm not going to question physics because someone smarter than me is already doing that work for me. So I'm just going to sit back and wait for the answer that he provides. And the problem with that is that it doesn't really. So it creates like a sense of false open-mindedness where you feel like, you don't question it because you think, oh, well, it's open-minded. Why should I question it? It's like, there's no dogma here. And that's exactly what they'll say. It's like, oh, science is not dogmatic. Science is not a religion. It's just a method. And if we had the right evidence, we would change our mind about God, which is total bullshit, by the way. I mean, I think that when it comes to if they provided legitimate evidence for the existence of God, they would fight that tooth and nail. They would be dragged into it, kicking and screaming into the idea that God exists. The only reason they say like, oh, if I was proven wrong, because they're so convinced that they're right, they have no idea that they could be proven wrong. So they're just like, oh yeah, well, it's like, a unicorn flying, like, go ahead, let's see it happen. They have this kind of like false confidence, this sort of like in their beliefs. And it's because it creates this illusion of open-mindedness, this illusion of, oh, we can change your opinion. But if you really press hard, and this is true for some other belief systems as well, but if you really press hard and you really go into the core belief system, you realize it's not as open-minded as you think.
Totally well put. And the whole indoctrination process, if we're going to look at the process, it starts with education. It starts with systemic education, taking the power away from the people. In other words, the teachers don't get to teach what they know. They teach what's in the syllabus. There's something inherently wrong with this. Many teachers have disagreed with the syllabus. I remember when I was in school, lots of teachers used to shake their head and say, well, I have to teach this as part of the syllabus. I don't really agree with it, but I have to teach it. You have to know it because otherwise you fail your exams. Do you know how many times I heard that in school? So how can the teachers be expected to teach something that they don't even believe? And I bet you've all heard that. I bet I'm not the only one. I bet all schools, most teachers said that, which actually says a lot. So why are teachers not allowed to actually teach? I think the problem starts with the systemic centralization of education. Let's look at the economic system for a moment. The problem starts with systemic centralization of the economic system, right? And so we've got fraud and all this nonsense going on, and the economic system is rigged, and it's a big shoo-ha, it's a big farce, it's nonsense. We all know it. We've all seen it. We don't even have to go into that discussion. But in the same way that is a failure due to centralization, let's look at governance. Governance, centralization. How many times have you heard local politicians saying that our hands are tied, there's nothing we can do? It's a centralized government. We hear it here in Cape Town all the time, our local politicians. And so centralized politics is failing. Centralized education, it's the same story. So whenever you centralize things, you tend to cause a lot of trouble because you take the power away from the people. So I believe that this is one of the reasons why indoctrination worked so well. And who started that? we're not pointing fingers, but we got to recognize the Catholic tradition was centralized around one man, the Pope. I like to call him the Pope, as we say here in South Africa. And South Africans know what that means. I'm not trying to make a pop out of anyone. When you make a pop out of someone, you're making a doll out of someone. You're making a joke out of someone, basically. It's a beautiful way of looking at it. So I think this idea of centralized education has forced a small group of people to be able to dictate what is the syllabus, what is the knowledge, what is the truth, and brainwash everybody else into this, so that those children, when they grow up and become scientists, they're already brainwashed. Their science can only go down that road because they've been locked into it. And then, of course, the centralization of PhDs, doctorates, certificates, the peer review process. It looks good on paper, but those people doing the peer review, they need funding for their work. And they don't get funding for their work unless they have the right theories. So they need to get peer reviewed by other people who are relying upon funding. And who controls the funding? It's not even the government most of the time. It's private corporates, funds that have a lot of say over what research gets done. And when a researcher gets given funding, it's not just there's funding, go and do research. It's like there's funding. That's what we want proved. You got to prove it. If you can prove it, you get a good reputation, and next time you might get funding again and you can do your job. You don't have to become a burger flipper at McDonald's, right? So financially, our scientists have been locked into the centralized form of science because of PhDs, because of peer review. Although it looks good on paper, the whole idea of the funding process for what can and can't be researched and what the goals are of the research are also predetermined by the people who hand over the money. So financially, the scientists have their hands tied in the same way that teachers have their hands tied, because they lose their job and their credibility if they don't teach a syllabus as it's put down in the textbook. They can't teach you what they know. In the old days, you got taught what people knew. People taught what they had discovered. Wisdom had a place in the classroom. Wisdom no longer has a place in the classroom. It is a mechanical system, and the mechanical system is, like all the other systems on Earth, centralized mechanics that is basically prone to failure. And I'd love to welcome dear Jeremy to the stage. Welcome, Jeremy. Jeremy is a beautiful soul. He's an open-minded thinker. He's inspired by... That was a little explosion of charcoal on my left, a little bang. Got to watch it. Inspired by nature, and nature has her own science. And he's a father and finds the wisdom within his heart from an intrinsic connection, very much related to the emotional intelligence, which is exactly what we need here, because there are some questions that can just emerge from the innate state of consciousness. Welcome, dear brother. Lovely to have you. An honor to have all of you guys on the stage. What a lovely crew. Do please say a few words.
Thank you for the introduction. What was I going to say? Seems like a lot of modern science is not necessarily trying to advance us as a species, or really teach us how to live in symbiosis with the earth in a more natural way. The same way when you go out, when you look at nature and you see something like the deer or the squirrels, it's been my experience that animals, I guess for the most part, pretty much they all are always living perfectly, and they can only live perfectly with their environment, right? I mean, excuse me, I got my hair in my mouth. Their environment can change artificially, and they'll do their best to adapt, and either they'll adapt and change or die out. But they're always living perfectly with their environment, right? And it's always been my idea that humans we're different, but there's definitely a way of being on this planet or realm, whatever it is, It's where we're at. We're supposed to be here. There's a way for us to live perfectly in this environment as well. And maybe it was once like that, right? But it seems like we're artificially removed from that state by the powers that be, the powers that seek power and control, and whatever that is seems to be in charge of whatever it is that they call science. I follow a few people. I'll give a shout out to a guy named Christopher Gardner. Maybe some of you are familiar with him and his work. His podcast is Biocharisma. And he has, throughout his life, investigated all sorts of natural sciences. He's talked to plants and figured out how to work with them and get them to thrive in different environments. He works with stuff called biochar. And on his podcast and his interviews, people he talks to, it's very clear that there is this other, I would say, true science that's out there, that exists, that is just being completely ignored by the establishment institutions. Because obviously, if that science was that true science was focused upon and propagated, it would lead to free energy and the end of starvation, and probably money and dependency on oil and all these different things. So it's because these things exist, because the information is out there. It can be obfuscated, of course, but we have this amazing thing called the internet and this type of electronic communication, and we can share information and share ideas, as you all know very well, and we can explore this stuff for ourselves. And there's really nothing stopping us from, on our own and collectively, investigating the science, making it real, and making it work for us outside of that establishment system. If you start to, let's say, capitalize on it, and you start to play their game, well, now you start to go into the territory of being a target. So you have to go about it in a way that's not necessarily for money, power, and all that sort of stuff. It should really not sound like it should come from a place in your heart, right?
Loving the common sense, brother. And as they say, you're not just a pretty face. Although you are wearing your pretty face today. You got that Jesus look going on. It's looking good, man.
Thanks.
So you've obviously been drinking a lot of good water and looking after yourself, got your skin looking nice and clear. And
it just worked out.
Well, that's going to help. But yeah, I think that's so fundamental. Like the financial system, once again, I was just talking about funding and how funding controls science and how PhDs and doctorates are based and restricted by funding for scientists to actually be able to work in the industry, and that they have to play ball to get these grants. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is what you're talking about is really fundamental. I mean, let's look at electricity for a moment. We can't have this conversation without Tesla. Can we have this conversation, people, without Tesla? I mean, so what was the end of Tesla's story was national security rocks up, secret services. Was it the CIA yet? Were they called the CIA yet? Anyway, These guys rock up at his door, right? And basically confiscate all of his equipment, take him into custody for a certain period of time. Then they release him after making him sign a, I'm not allowed to say anything about anything, NDA. And under the threat of if he ever does science again, he'll be locked up. He'll be incarcerated. So how does one get that right? What does one have to do to get the powers that be that ought to not be so frustrated while he was talking about what you're talking about? Free energy. So we know where free energy leads. It leads to some secret prison somewhere where you get tortured, locked up, your things taken from you, your any rights to speak about what's happened taken away from you under a national security badge, basically limiting you and totally circumventing truth. So I think what you're saying is so fundamentally true. And when we look at electricity, was it Alexander Bell? Is that right? Am I getting the name right? I think it's Alexander Bell. And that was in contrast to Tesla.
No, that's Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison.
Sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
Bell is another guy we're going to probably be mentioning. Bell had some involvement in another theory. I must try and remember. But you're right. It was T. Edison, my mistake. He was the one that decided on using this AC current the way we use it. That DC was just too unsafe. DC was too unsafe because you need less of it to do more. And you can't count that crap. You can't count it. You can't be like, okay, well, there you go. That's how much DC you got. That you owe us that much money.
Yeah. I do have a friend of mine who is a trained journeyman electrician. And I can't exactly, it was a little bit ago, and I can't exactly remember how the conversation went, but DC is used in certain circumstances. It's not all AC. DC is used in certain circumstances. However, it seems as though whatever AC was decided a long time ago. We were going to mainly, this was the way we're going to mainly use this, and so that's more prevalent.
You're right. DC is normally used wherever there's a battery. Wherever there's a limited power source, DC is used because it's so much more efficient. It's so much more practical. So if DC is not safe, then how can you have a DC lawnmower or a DC weed eater, bushwhacker, or a DC chainsaw, right? Or a DC car. So DC is not safe. This was the premise why AC had to be used. But now we've got DC cars on the road. So how do we explain this? Was it a lie?
Well, the vaccines were safe until they weren't, and then the people that made them were like, yeah, one of the side effects is death.
Yeah, those arm-prickling adventures were, I shouldn't be laughing because it's not funny. I know a lot of people that have suffered. I know a lot of people that have lost loved ones, grandfathers, fathers, mothers, daughters, children, to this experimental use of an experimental drug that had never been really cleared for safety. And there was a lot of money that was made out of it. Once again, we come back to the same thing, don't we? We come back to the money. And so capitalism is supposedly indicative of freedom, right? So we were taught that capitalism produces freedom. We've got to ask ourselves a question. How free are we within the sphere of capitalism?
Well, capitalism can get you freedom, but it's within the hierarchy of another system. So the way I've always kind of figured it, in my cosmology, whatever human beings are, we've been here for long, long, long time, right? And there are certain. My idea is that there's certain groups of people that figured out the power and control game a long time ago, and they've just worked on it and built and built and built and built and built. And now there's certain groups of people that they are at the top, and they are in charge of the systems. And so we have, the system of money, and that controls the economy, and that controls whatever can happen within that, right? To a certain extent. You can go to the mountaintop, you can go to the desert, and you can go to the jungle. Maybe you can go to the bottom of the ocean, and you can be there on your own, or maybe ones and twos, and you can really live that free life. Because the other way to do it, like your blood, your body, our bodies are no different from theirs, right? And so when you're born,
They don't believe that. They don't believe that.
Sure, if it bleeds, it dies. Okay. No matter what they believe, they might be able to project their spirit into the next incarnation through the birth canal. Okay. But when you're born, like all you're born free, right? All the laws of nature, they're no different for you. They're all there for you, right? And they're all there for you to exploit. So I guess it depends on your riz, and whether you can figure out how to carve a piece of the earth out for yourself. And you can do that. Anyways.
What do the rest of you guys think? Since we're touching on these very sensitive points. Maybe people are a little bit busy at the moment.
Yeah,
it does happen.
No worries. I want to talk a little bit about the electricity thing, because it's very mysterious. So I was fascinated with lightning. I had this amazing like a vision, like not like a divine vision or anything like that, but like kind of like like a creative vision. Like I want to paint something, right? And I had this idea, or I want to film something, and I had this idea of like a guy on a mountaintop, and there's a storm, and he's got his hands up, and he wants the power of lightning, and he's able to project his energy upwards, and then the lightning comes down and it meets him, and he's holding the lightning as it's like, and then he's got a ball of lightning. And of course, people get hit by lightning, but I was like why? But you have this. I forget exactly what it's called. There is a scientific term for this, but your body has its electrical field, and it kind of has this like thread that goes up, and the electrical charge in the sky can come down and meet that. And I'm fascinated by how is that created? And this is like a question to you, is like, how is that, what is creating that electricity within us?
That I think is a really good question. And this is what I would term. Okay, so I want to get into this conversation deeply in another way, but I'm going to reference it now and get back to it later. Reference Planck's constant. I think Planck's constant is really relevant. Is Planck's constant 71 zeros? Just let me see what is Planck's constant exactly. I don't want to get it wrong. Planck's constant. I think it's 10 to the power of 71. Was it 10 to the power of 73? No. Planck's constant symbolizes H is a fundamental universal constant that defines quantum nature of energy and relates the energy of the photon to its frequency. Its international system units is SI. The constant value is 6.62607015 times 10 to the minus 34. Okay. 34 zeros. It's still enough zeros. We haven't lost anything. It's still a ridiculous number to write on a page, right? So 34 zeros. Let's just take this to a level of reality. So 9 zeros is a billion. 12 zeros is a trillion, right? So 15 zeros is 1,000 trillion. That's a gazillion, right? 18 zeros is a million trillion. 21 zeros is a trillion trillion. 24 zeros is 1,000 trillion trillion. 27 is a million trillion trillion. 30 is a, so we're talking about a trillion 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 trillion. and that's an incredible number. So when we are looking at so-called quantum mechanics, quantum theory, we've got to take into account this shift that we are not in a vacuum. We are effectively, when we measure reality, we are measuring 1 divided by this number. And I'm going to put it here on the screen so that people can get an idea of what it is that we're talking about. Just how ridiculous the Newtonian model is. So there it is for us all to take a look at. So when I saw this in school, it blew my mind. And I was the first one to say, sir, which part of this looks suspicious? So 6.62607015 times 10 to the minus 34. Take a number 1 and put a 1 on top of that big number. And that gives you a ratio. And that's how much of space we are dealing with when we are looking at space-time in our theories. So this is why physics has discovered that there is more energy in 1 cubic centimeter of space than in the entire known universe. So if you take every atom, every planet, every sun, every black hole, everything that is known and calculatable, and you add it all into a mass and consider it as joules, right? Because joules become grams and kilograms, as we know, right? Mass. If you take this all into account with mass, you've got a substantially, exponentially more potential energy in 1 cubic centimeter of a so-called vacuum. We got to look at this. We've got to look at what this means. So the nature of reality that we're experiencing here is 1 over this number, I would argue, right? Which means that there are parallel universes. The multiverse is real. Because this is just a small fraction of what exists, and we're experiencing it here. So how many of these universes or whatever that we're experiencing here actually exists? Well, the math suggests that we're only dealing with a very small amount of substance and energy that is, where's the rest of the energy? It's in subspace. So the quantum entanglement field, what we call the quantum entanglement field, what we call the aether from classical science, which we inherited from the Greeks, which has been rediscovered under the term of quantum entanglement, is essentially this hidden network of energy where everything's happening. So this hidden network of energy is, I would suggest, is the consciousness field. And the consciousness field is emitting on the surface of the consciousness field a membrane of matter as we're experiencing it. It's like the ocean. Imagine looking at the surface of the ocean and basing everything on the surface of the ocean, but the ocean's actually very deep. There's actually a lot more going on down there. And so all of that energy, you could look at the surface of the ocean, you can say, well, everything that's happening on the ocean is just based on the surface. No, you have to understand how deep the ocean is to understand what's going on in the ocean. And so on the consciousness field, all of the energy is consciousness. Consciousness is light. I would say that I go with Bohr, not Einstein, from the 30s. We got to that junction. Do you believe in Bohr or Einstein? Einstein was pure materialism. Bohr's theories, the Bohr group of scientists, he's just the guy whose name is on the label, but there was like two camps of science. Bohr's camp of science was suggesting that consciousness is interactive in the way that Cosmic was presenting the hollowness and deficiencies of understanding the universe in terms of pure mechanical processes, that there was consciousness. Let's call that consciousness God, without any man on a throne with a wand, with a crown, with jealousy of that God and this God. Just take all that nonsense out, and we just put the word God in there. And what does God mean before we talk about God? Just in case there are religious people that think I'm talking about their God, I'm not. I am using the word God in my context. To me, God is a word that explains the consciousness that we can't explain, right? That hidden consciousness that is responsible for why gravity exists, why atoms remember their shape, why they remember when to live and die, why cause and effect can happen. All these principles, all these living laws of nature. I consider the laws of nature to be living beings, and that we're living in a living substrate of consciousness, and that this consciousness is emitting through the sun, and that the sun is an expression of consciousness, and that the consciousness of the sun is being expressed in such a way that it materializes and becomes light. And that light is then taken and turned into a sugar crystal, back to the crystals, right? And the sugar crystal then becomes the fuel to fuel the molecular expression of what is consciousness. For consciousness is vibrating, and the vibration of the consciousness field, which is the basis of the entire universe, is vibrating at a very broad spectrum of resonance and frequencies. And we see the electromagnetic spectrum as a very small aspect of that consciousness field, which we can call prana. That's what they called it in India in ancient times. Or we can call it aether, what the ancient Greeks called it. Or we can call it chi, that is empowered by Shen, if we want to take the Chinese Taoist system. You take whichever one you want, but the same ideas apply. And so this energetic reality is emissions of the consciousness field that is producing a crystallization on the surface of the proverbial sphere of consciousness that we are basically experiencing as reality. And that this is because of light, because of the light being emitted from the sun, that consciousness is actually becoming light. And the light of consciousness is what produces all of these atomic reactions of the polarization. And because of the polarization, you've got the different spins of the particle and the different alignments of all these particles, which are the expressions of the different aspects of consciousness, all reflected as above, so below, according to the Hermetic principles and principles of every metaphysical spiritual tradition out there seems to reference that there is this relationship of the inner that is reflected in the outer, and there is this continuity of expression and balance of forces. So where all this energy inside of our bodies comes from, I would say it comes from the consciousness field directly, because the DNA is a very fast resonating frequency of double helix. And so this double helix frequency of resonance is subatomic. It's being seen and expressed and experienced as codes, and it's been notated as codes, but it is much more than a code. It is a cymatic expression of resonant frequencies, which is consciousness coalescing into molecular structure due to the cymatic resonant frequencies of sound that produces the space three-dimensionally that the molecular expressions can occupy as a reflection of the vibratory frequencies of the cymatic resonance. So this resonant field of vibration is emitted through the DNA, and then it is picked up by the which is a amino acid chain, right? Let's not forget that. It is picked up by the astral field, and the astral field is reflected in us, which is a different gradient of vibration reflected in us as the amino acid chains of the hormone system, which are vibrating at a lower rate. And this is then reflected through the etheric into our bodies as the resonant vibratory rate of the central nervous system, which is arcs of electricity sparking through our axons, being chemically converted through the matrix of salts present in our synaptic spaces between the axon nerves in order to create a resonant frequency of thoughts that can run through our mind, and that the thoughts running through our mind and the hormonal expressions in our blood are conducting all of these energies. And here's an interesting point. Hormones have got so much energy in them. Let's just look at this. When a pregnant woman picks up a bus because her baby's trapped under it, or a car or whatever, right? It's hormones that makes her do it. When you jump over a 6-foot, 8-foot fence because you're being chased by a dog, it's hormones that give you those superpowers. It's the emotional intensity of the hormonal field running through your blood that gives you abilities that you didn't know you had. So it sort of accounts for superpowers, spiritual powers, psychic powers. And so that's where I think all the energy is coming from. I think that we are the emission of the consciousness field, and that the molecules are just the cymatic expressions of the DNA's resonant vibrations, and everything else is coordinated into a structure. And that resonant frequency is polarized. It's polarized into astral and etheric fields. And the astral and etheric fields are the electrical and hormonal systems that govern our physical bodies, so that the hormonal systems can be in tune with and reflecting the fact that the consciousness field is in a state of balance and duality, and that the astral and the etheric fields of resonant frequencies of reality are expressions of something which is polarizing, which is the causal field, which is the spiritual field, which is the soul. So all of that energy comes from the soul. That's my take on it.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I have a question, but I guess I'm not really sure how to ask it. But like, I was thinking about, like, as you were talking about this this ocean of consciousness, which also seems to be within us as well, and you can sink into it through meditative practices. But like what about this consciousness makes us each individual, like what like there's this ocean of consciousness expressing itself through the ways that you were just expressing, but how, like what is differentiating all of us?
I think I might actually have an answer to that question. So lately
you kind of understand what I'm saying? Like,
I get what you're saying. Like, how is it that, the universe is sort of this one consciousness? So how does that create individual beings, essentially?
Yeah.
So I've kind of had a pretty big radical shift in my occult perspective. I would say that, just kind of based on what I've sort of like been looking at, I no longer consider myself a monist. I'm kind of embracing this sort of duotheism. And what I've noticed, there's a problem that not only that science is guilty of, but I think also religion is guilty of, is that it's because if you think about, first of all, think about science, its epistemological perspective on reality is that, there really isn't any room for consciousness at all. Everything is just a blind mechanical matter. Whereas, was I think the mistake some spiritual people make is they say that, oh well, consciousness is this transcendent thing, but matter is devoid of consciousness, and consciousness kind of just comes down and gets into this unconscious matter and makes the matter conscious. I am actually playing with this idea that individual consciousness is actually created from two different consciousness fields, a masculine and a feminine one. And the idea, here's the way I think of it, like just kind of think about like how we're having this conversation on a computer right now. We have a kind of all have a software that we can kind of project our thoughts and images onto. Without the software, we're not able to communicate with you. I think in a sense, when a body is created, it already has a kind of organic primordial consciousness to it. And that consciousness then sort of channels our individual soul into that body. So it's like there's already a consciousness within the body before our soul even enters it. And then the soul kind of comes into it, because it's basically a fertile ground where consciousness, soul, and spirit can actually interact with matter. So in my Zarfexology studies, there's all sorts of different types of Zarfexes outside in the universe, and there's apparently what I call there's four basic like sort of types. There's solid, fluid, gaseous, and plasma, and there's four subtypes within each of those. We live in what's known as a sort of a solid fluid Zarfex. So it's like there's a physical sort of matter, but there's just sort of this fluid consciousness that's able to interact with it. But there's also this Zarfex where it's solid both in the sort of the astral and the physical. And because the matter doesn't have a sort of a conduit for individual consciousness to manifest itself, individual consciousness beings can't incarnate there. It's like it's impossible. So I've been playing with this idea that I think this actually really a lot of ways solves the hard problem of consciousness, in the sense that, why is it that consciousness is able to interact with conscious matter? I say that matter is already has a consciousness, and then we kind of go into it. In the same way, if you have a computer, you can't upload a program onto it if it doesn't already have software running on it. Let's say you want to download a game for your computer. You can't download a game into a computer that can't turn on, that can't actually turn on the screen and become interactive. And I think that when it comes to like bodies and souls, I think there's a similar dynamic at play. So to me, you have this sort of, I think of this duotheist model. There's awareness, and which is sort of the masculine sort of, intellectual, pure seeing outward. And then there's the feminine being, where it's this more matter and this vessel where you take an experience inward. And it's the fusion of these two elements that basically creates individual consciousness. And I think that in a lot of ways, what I've been fascinated with when it comes to models of the universe and God is that a lot of the religions think of God as, and kind of like, at least the more modern ones, like when I say maybe not modern, but beyond, like after monotheism, is that they're very asexual. Like this idea that God is only male and that he basically kind of split off asexually, like a slug or something like that. But I think that the polytheists had it right, where they had the Greeks or the Egyptians, where they would have family trees who would, like, Zeus and Hera, they would give birth to Hercules, and Hercules would have somebody. I think that they had a more accurate picture of that. So, and this leads to another interesting thread, that I think this sort of mechanism, this sort of mechanistic narrative, has farther roots than the sort of modern science Renaissance era that we know. I think just through the evolution of different belief systems, you kind of can see the track record kind of go back through Christianity, where Christianity was kind of like, it's not very much like, oh, there's only one God and there's one truth and there's one reality, one way of seeing things. And I think that the scientific materialism kind of carries that same torch, but does it with a different belief system. At the same time, there is only one truth. Everything is just this one objective thing. But I think having this sort of bilateral model of consciousness has been really something very fascinating that I've been exploring. I think it explains a lot of some of the missing data that both scientists and occultists have been looking for. I know that's a pretty bold claim to make, but that's what I'm putting out on the table.
Does this have anything to do with Shiva and Shakti?
It's kind of similar to the Shiva and Shakti dynamic. I think the only main difference with the way I look at it, so the Hermeticism, the idea would be that when male and female unite, they become one kind of androgynous singularity. I don't see it like that. I think that it's a weird that the universe is, I kind of have this phrase, we are all two, instead of saying we are all one. But I think it's difficult because we like to think of things starting off from one, but it's almost like a chicken and the egg kind of scenario in that it's kind of impossible to conceive of one existing before the other. You know what I mean? So it's similar to the Shiva and Shakti dynamic, but with some caveats and differences, because it's not, it doesn't come from that Hinduist idea where Shiva and Shakti are sort of two assets that branched off from a monad. My model doesn't have a kind of singular monad. The idea is that there's always these two sort of monads that kind of paradoxically have always existed outside of space and time.
I think that's beautifully put, Cosmic, and I like your inference of the Shiva and Shakti, because I think it sheds a lot of light. The way I understand it is you've got three fields of consciousness. So you've got the divine masculine, you've got the divine feminine. And I think of the masculine impression as the etheric field. It's got more of a masculine element to it. And the astral field has got more of an emotional element to it. Hence, the astral manifests in the body as hormones, emotions, feminine. The etheric resonates in the body as the central nervous system, thinking, logic, coherency, masculine, right? And where the emotional intelligence is the expression of the heart's intelligence, of intuitional ability to transcend the rational mind. So the etheric exists within the astral, and the astral exists within the causal, and the causal is the divine. So when we look at it like this, there is Brahma, there is Vishnu, and there is Shiva. And within Shiva has his consort, the feminine version of Shiva, because all things are polarized in this reality. Brahma has his consort. Believe it or not, his consort is his daughter. He rocks. I cannot think of her name. Saraswati. Whoops, naughty. That's your daughter, dude. Anyway, we're gonna bypass that story for a moment, and then of course you've got Vishnu. Vishnu is expressed as now with Vishnu we've got Lakshmi Devi, right? But various different forms of this Lakshmi Devi. So you've got three sets of polarities, right? Now, in the stories of the Vedic story, they say that Vishnu emerges from Shiva. Vishnu emerges from Shiva. Shiva emerges from Brahma. Brahma emerges from Vishnu, right? So the Brahma, and when we speak of Parabrahm, we're speaking of Manu. We're speaking of Adam Kadmon. We're speaking of that oversoul, that huge oversoul, which is almost it's a group consciousness. It's a big group of souls that are acting as a single soul consciousness. Like when you see ants or birds when they're flying, that's Brahma. Vishnu is the emotional connection that connects things to each other. Shiva is that ability to rationalize and understand. So when we speak of Shiva rules over the mystical occult sciences, rationalizing and understanding the occult sciences. Vishnu rules over, Vishnu's avatar is Krishna. Krishna is the love that makes us sacrifice ourselves, karma yoga. sacrifice ourselves as warriors in the great war of good and evil. Yeah. So the ethical, moral dilemmas of Vishnu's department. And Brahma is that creative, instinctual drive that is within us. Now, Brahma is got 4 faces facing in 4 directions as one of his symbols in Muladhara, the root chakra, which is very interesting, which comes back to the expression of analysis in the anus, the ability to put things together. So these 3 principles are essentially, like you could say, the masculine and the feminine that come from the sexless. Because Brahma doesn't actually have a consort. But there are stories about him having weird relationships with Saraswati. Saraswati is the goddess of music. She's seen with a sitar, vibration, sound, music. So the musicality of being the vibrations is the expression. So within Brahma, the very music of Saraswati is Brahma's expression. And then we have the glue that ties it together and the substance that arises from it. So we speak of Mahakali or Parvati as being the metaphoric, the symbolized event horizon from which the power of creation and destruction is being born into physicality, which is why in the ancient stories, when Parvati gets pissed off, things go wrong, right? Shiva's like, what do I need to do? I'll lie down. Dance on me. When Kali gets going, she gets going. She dances, the entire universe stops existing. She can dance the entire universe out of existence. So Shiva is a reflection of an aspect of the consciousness field. And that is, in a sense, masculine. And Vishnu is an aspect of the consciousness field which has a flavor of feminine in it. Look at Krishna. Look at Vishnu. Look at the pictures. It's very feminine. And Brahma is like the supreme father, but within him, he isn't even sexed. So you can see how we have a polarity within a polarity, expressing these mixed notions of polarity here. And I think they do actually not contradict anything you've said, Cosmic, to bring it back to what you were saying, because what Cosmic says makes perfect sense. There's a feminine and there's a masculine presence, and that our consciousness do spring from a greater field of consciousness, and that great field of consciousness is the Brahma, is the consciousness of all things, like that what you were talking about, atoms having to know what to do. The supreme intelligence of creation is Brahma. So I just think there's different depths that we go into the consciousness field when we're looking at these 3, and these 3 become polarized. So these 3 are polarized within each system. There's a polarity which sort of brings them back to recreate each other through each other, showing that there's this intense quantum entanglement process between these 3 that actually makes them indivisible from each other, in a sense. Welcome back, dear brother Indy. Are you with us?
Yes. Could it be said that in the Brahmin school that the Godhead is represented by Brahma being in the womb of Kali, and so ultimately there's one mind and a mother, so that would make 2 ultimately, but I think a lot of times they say Vishnu comes before Brahma, so that kind of confuses me. Like, where is he in the duality of Kali and Brahma in the womb? Where is he?
I think it's perspective. That's what my thoughts are on it. That depends on where you're looking for and where you're looking from. I don't think they come before or after each other. That's just my point. I think they all come from the same point at the same time, and they are all reflections of each other. In other words, within the womb of Kali, the potency of Brahma is imbuing the intelligence of all creation with the power and intelligence to maintain structure. That's the womb of Kali, the womb of Parvati, which is impregnated by the consciousness of Shiva. And that Shiva consciousness is what dictates the evolutional process by the destructive impulses to cause change, to cause destruction, to cause transmutation, to cause transformation, Shiva. And so transformation, change, destruction of Shiva cannot exist without the creation of Brahma. Brahma is the creator. Shiva is the destroyer. Vishnu is what happens when you've got creation and destruction happening together. So you could say that they come from each other. What came first, the chicken or the egg? I think they all came as a result of each other. In other words, there is just one single truth, and that one single truth can be looked at from three different aspects because it expresses itself in three different ways.
Yeah, to respond to the question that was asked earlier, that what separates us and makes us different, I think the ego is the epitome of the delusion of separation, where we focus on our differences, and ultimately we can look beyond this and see that we are really all one. Other people are all just another aspect of oneness together with us, and when we think of ourselves as being able to harm another at the benefit for ourselves or vice versa, we start to realize that it's really ultimately what's best for one and all and mutual benefit is what's best, not necessarily one getting up on another as much. But when from an egoic mind, it does make sense to harm others for your own personal benefit more.
I think of it like if the universe is a melody, each person is a note, and every note is distinctive. And the thing is, it's like if one of those notes is taken out of that melody, the melody isn't the same anymore. So, some people, they talk about like, oh, it's like, oh, we're all, we're separated. There's all these differences are bad. I think differences are great. I like that people are different than me. I like that people have different opinions and different outlooks and have different tastes and things. It's what variety really is, the spice of life. And so I think that a lot of ways you can kind of have that individualism and that collectivism sort of at the same time. I always think of my model that I always do as a multicolored quilt. So you have a bunch of squares that are different colors, but they're all sewed together into the same quilt, while at the same time, the original colored squares still retain their distinction and existence. So I kind of look at it as it's like you said, kind of multiple aspects of the same thing.
I would even say like what you've said in a very simple way, because I totally see where you're coming from. It makes perfect sense. I would consider a house, and I would look at the house, and I would say that the foundation of the house is Brahma, and the walls and roof of the house is Vishnu, and the doors and windows of the house is Shiva, as an example. And we are either the door frame or a part of the door frame or the door or the hinge on the door or the doorknob or the door handle or the bricks on the walls or the mortar that holds the bricks together or the plaster or the paint or the ceilings or the tiles on the roof, or we are the depths of that foundation that has been dug and all the substance that has been carefully structured in the foundation to be able to take all the compression from all the other elements. And so each one of us is a unique piece of this house, but the house is a collective reflection of what we are as a being. But when you look at that house, you see a single house. It's one house. It's a collective. It's only a single thing. But when you go and you start to look closely at the house, you notice that brick is different to that brick, and that piece of mortar has to be there. And without that brick and that piece of mortar, and without that door handle, without that door, you don't have a house. I don't know. I tried to make it simple.
Have we talked about how exactly science is a religion yet? Has that been gone over?
We went over it briefly.
Okay.
There's a lot of space in that.
Right. So let me put it out there. Let's start with a religion. What is a religion? What are the tenets of a religion? How do we recognize a religion? I'm putting out
Anybody want to shoot that?
to you
Anybody
guys.
want to fire at that?
I'm no expert.
Well,
I would
it's complicated.
go ahead. Trust me.
But I would say that what makes something a religion is that when you have a sort of a fixed metaphysical perspective on the world that can't really change, is something that is ideological, it's dogmatic, and there's a certain set of rules and concepts that never really change or whatever. And it's interesting when you talk about I think that we talk about science as a religion. I think that the proper term is scientism, which is what the actual word is when you make science into a religion. The thing about science being religion and how it indoctrinates people, I touched upon this earlier in the conversation, is that it works in a different way in terms of the indoctrination process. Like I mentioned before, that typical religions, ones that may have like a god or a supernatural entity, will say there's these fixed rules that you can't change, and if you go against them, I'm going to punish you severely, right? And there's kind of like, you just have to go along, you have to follow it, you can't question it. Science works differently. Science is more like, it's like, it's open-ended. You can question it and you can make assumptions, but we have all these experts who are going to figure it out for you. They're going to figure out the physics. They're going to figure out the biology. So you don't have to do anything. So the idea is like, well, I'm not going to question science because there's already smarter science who are questioning it for me. So that creates a kind of intellectual complacency. And that, to me, is how the brainwashing of science actually works, by creating a false sense of open-mindedness, where you think it's open-minded, so you never have the incentive to question it in the first place. And that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying for sure, because it seems like to go back to what I was saying earlier, about there are these these two separate sciences. If you want to be an institutional scientist, you got to go through the training, right? And it, it it's crazy. It's almost like the institutional science is like the right hand path, right? Where there's the schooling, and there's the training, and there's all this stuff that you have to learn, and you get to a certain point where you graduate and you got some letters after your name, and you're working for whatever pharmaceutical corporation. But if you start to go outside of that, and maybe do your own thing, and you are presenting papers that go against what's already been established, you're like blacklisted, or maybe even assassinated. So it seems like, to me, it kind of seems like it's more of an evil cult than a religion.
Absolutely, but most religions tend to be cults, and they're just not obviously a cult. But when we think of what a cult is, religions tend to be cult. I mean, right from the beginning of time, religions were saying, "Give us your money."
Sorry, go on. But I think what it really is, that I've been thinking about it, it's the fourth Abrahamic faith. That's what materialism essentially is. Because if you think about it, a lot of the Western materialist ideas actually evolved out of Christianity. But specifically, I'm talking about the deists of the 1700s. So before materialism, really came into vogue. It was all about deism. So deism is essentially the idea that the universe is mechanical, but it's a mechanical universe created by God. So God basically kind of wound up the clock of the universe, and then he walked into another room to go to the bathroom. That's essentially kind of the gist of deism. And there was the idea that, you know, God is this divine watchmaker. He makes his gears. He makes this very carefully calculated universe where it can all be explained, you know, via science and objective truth. Then, like a couple hundred years later, there's like, oh, let's take the same model. This is a really good model, but let's get rid of the God part. We don't really need that anymore. We can just explain this stuff with these methods alone. It's a completely irrelevant thing. So and the other thing that's interesting is that if you really spend time talking, like listening to Christians, and not just like the fundamentalist ones, but the more level-headed kind of intellectual ones, you see there's actually a lot of similarities in the belief systems of Christians and sort of these like materialist, atheist, skeptics types. They're both about objective truth. They're both about, you know, don't trust your intuition because, you know, there's this objective world that's bigger than you out there, and, you know, don't really trust yourself. There's this kind of a semblance of need for order. There is also a kind of a conformity of the community. Only the sort of the village elders can sort of like come up with the rules in the same way, you know, only the advanced scientists can create the scientific precepts. So I think if you understand the sort of the connectance, because a lot of people, you know, it's not like science, this kind of scientific materialist worldview didn't come out of a vacuum. It's actually kind of, it's almost kind of like birthed from Christianity, like some kind of like mutated abortion or whatever, this kind of weird deformed fetus that is materialism. So if you can kind of conceptualize it like that, and you understand that, and the other aspect on a more kind of like, you know, cultural level, there's a lot of these, you know, these atheist types that are just as militant and proselytizing as the Christians. Like, you ever been like online, you'd be like, oh my God, how could you possibly believe in this occultism? How could you possibly believe there's no such thing as spirits? You need to go to a mental institution. They like freak out, and they legitimately like, they're like yelling at you. They're getting in their face. There is that same religious fervor to it. And I think in the sense that, I guess if you think about when it comes to something, a religion, every religion has a kind of a fundamental core sort of like a core like metaphysical structure and
set of precepts.
Yes, so sets of precepts. And the scientific materialism one is that, you know, everything is matter, there is no soul. It's just everything is matter. It's a monistic philosophy essentially, which doesn't make sense because they always say, oh, consciousness can be described as something, you know, physical. But then it's like, okay, how? It's like they'll say, oh, this electrical current in the brain, that's conscious. But then they don't explain. They only can explain the how of consciousness, like where it like sort of comes from, but they can't explain what it actually is, or like what is the actual phenomenon of consciousness. Like, it's really, they don't know. And in a similar sense of like, you know, faith, this idea that's the other aspect of what makes it a religion, the faith aspect. It's like, well, because if you ask a lot of these deeper questions to some of these atheists, they'll be like, well, I don't know. I don't know the answers about God, but I know that science will prove it wrong eventually. It's that idea that we have faith that science is going to come along and it's going to push all these naughty, irrational ideas off the table, but they haven't done that yet. So there's that faith that science is going to basically work in their favor. Or the other possibility that they're not recognizing is that maybe science will prove their worldview wrong, that science will prove materialism wrong. And I think you actually can make the case for that if you spend a lot of time looking into parapsychology, things like near-death experience reports, remote viewing accounts, like all these different like things that, you know, that don't get published in the mainstream videos. And you look at this stuff, this is not like some flaky, you know, thing. There's some pretty legitimately good evidence and pretty like well-rounded people who like double and triple blind studies to figure this out and coming up with positive results. So I think that it's not so much that science in it of itself is a religion, because what science basically at its core is simply a tool where one uses evidence to ascertain a truth that is outside of one's subjective perception. The problem with science is the metaphysical belief in materialism, which is literally I think if we want to talk about the religion part, it is the belief in a material universe, which is, you can't really prove that anyway. It's not really, I mean, according to their own things, it's, not really something you can even falsify. And it's even funny too when they talk about like, oh, we can't find evidence for immaterial things until we have material evidence for it, which is like, but that's impossible. You can't have like, if you want to like have something that's immaterial, it's immaterial. If you describe something as being material, then it's no longer immaterial. So it doesn't make sense. So I think that you have with science definitely can operate like a religion, but in a very atypical way that's not typical of most supernatural based religion, because it is more of a secular religion. It's a sort of it's a negative. Think of it like a negative cult, where where most, like, if you think of like positive and negative, positive is that I'm going to make a cult by adding something to reality that isn't there. This is a cult that takes something that already is existing and subtracts it from reality. So it's like it's a negative belief. That's the way I would see it.
I want to second a lot of what you're saying, because a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I want to concentrate on a question that PK asked, which I think is really powerful and relevant, because it's important, I think. And I agree totally that science is, when you say it's a type of a secular religion, I would add to what you're saying by saying that it's a religional, in the way that it's a religion that's different, is that it's an evolving religion. So I think that the religion that we have are religions that have evolved to become what they are. They're finished products. Science isn't a finished product. It's a religion that's evolving. And so they keep moving the goalposts. So it's like the difference between creating a fashion that is a fashion, or keep changing the fashion along the lines. So there's this mutation, which is a big part, I think, of science, which isn't common to the other religions per se, although in the Vedic tradition, there seems to be much more mutability, much more space for this scientific mutational aspect, which is why when you look at Vedic schools of religious thought, it's very scientific in the way that it's approached compared to other religions, for example, just as a perspective. But is religion bad? Now, that's a really good question. I don't believe that religion is bad. I don't believe that religion is a problem. I do believe that when religion is forced onto you as a doctrine, that you don't have the choice to think for yourself, it can become toxic. And I think that science, in this way, has been forced onto our children and forced onto us in the educational system to take absolute truths, in the same way that a Catholic school can force the Catholic tradition of brainwashing onto children without giving the children the freedom to think for themselves and choose what they want to believe and how they want to relate to the world. And I think science has been forced onto us through the educational system and through the popular media that has presented certain schools of science as being the absolute. And that's where I think as well it becomes a challenge, because when you consider your religion to be absolute, then what does it say about other people's religions that don't have the same words as yours? So in that way, religion can be a problem, because if you're Muslim and I'm Christian and he's Jewish and we don't agree, are we going to fight a war over that? Are we going to have an argument because your ideas is different to mine, is different to his? Is it going to be potentially something that can cause disagreement between people, which isn't healthy? Should we not be doing things that can produce agreement between people? But in the same way, science is producing disagreement between people, because we're from this camp, we believe that. We're from this camp, we believe that. Well, we've got the PhDs, we've got the doctorates, we've got the funding, so screw you, you're out of a job, kind of thing. So there's this intellectual war that's been caused and waged by the so-called fluidity of science as a religious expression, as I see it. And I think that religion itself isn't a bad thing. I think when one goes through life and one has a religious experience and one finds a religion that can explain what one's experienced, I think it's really healthy if it's chosen. And most of the Christians that I've met that have not been born and indoctrinated into Christianity, but found Christianity because it's something in their life that caused them to become inspired, those are normally the more open-minded kind of people. People you can have a conversation with, and you can tell them that you don't believe what they're saying, you believe something else, and they'll be like, okay, well, that's your belief. They won't become like, oh, well, you're evil, you're an infidel, you know. Welcome back, dear Indy. Lovely to see you back, brother. You haven't had much to say. What do you think? Is religion bad?
Well, now that
Sounds not coming in next.
now that Indy's back, I gotta go.
Oh, well, bless you.
I know
brother.
I've only been here for a short little while, but I gotta go do the stuff. So,
All right, take it easy, man.
yeah, thanks for having me part of the conversation, and
God bless you.
stay strong and move your body, okay, guys?
And I hope you have a great day with your sweet little princess.
I will.
Much love to you, your partner, and your princess. And if you're going to be getting your house moving sorted out, Godspeed to you. I hope joy and peace come to you.
Thank
Blessings.
you so much. All right, I'll talk to you later,
Thank
guys.
you.
So I guess in regards to the whole science and religion topic, I think another aspect of every religious cult is that every cult has a devil. Every cult has a Satan. And the reason I bring that up is I think one of the things that really fuels the narrative of science is its hatred of the spiritual. Sometimes, like, these people, there's some people who are skeptical of God and spirituality, and there's people who just utterly despise it. They want to wipe it off the face of the earth. They just think, oh, this evil, cruel God that, if religion is responsible for all these terrible things, we have to wipe it off the face of the earth. And in a sense, if you think about it, one of the things that fuels this sort of the religious aspect of science is its relationship to other religions. So in a way, it's sort of like occultism and spirituality is kind of or just supernatural belief is kind of the devil of science. And that fear of that devil is what kind of pushes people deeper into the cult. It's like, oh, you believe in, you don't want to be like one of these crazy, kooky weirdos that's, believing all these immoral and terrible things. It's like, and they kind of like, they succumb to science out of fear. And I think one of the things that was also like, I used to be a lot more of way more of a skeptic than I am now, but like, really didn't even like, there was a point in my life where I basically just sort of mocked and laughed at like spiritual stuff. Like I was that deep into the skepticism. But I think it's also one of the other things about cults is peer pressure. When you're around, I was in college, a lot of my friends, the people I talked to, were atheists. And there was this sense that if you express any kind of belief in any kind of supernatural thing, you're just the dumbest, retarded idiot, just so gullible and stupid. And it's like, and if you want to think of yourself as intelligent, you kind of just go along with the atheist narrative. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to think of myself as stupid. And that kind of like that fear of being considered irrational or dumb is also what really pushes the religion of science as it is. So there's definitely a lot of like factors, and I think you probably can make the case that sort of the culture of science as we know it does function a lot like a religion.
I like that you point that out, the peer pressure issue, because I think it's very much a part, and we see the same thing happening in religion, right? There's peer pressure. I mean, gosh, anybody ever had run-ins with the Jehovah's Witnesses? Once they start turning up at your door, they don't stop. And
that's a creepy cult. Like the actual.
This is what I'm saying. Like, and even in the local church, the peer pressure is so lovely. They're so warm. They're so friendly. Like, oh, we're inviting you to come back. Are you going to join us again? You feel guilty. Like, these people are being so lovely, warm, and sweet. I must come back because it's rude of me not to, So there's different ways in which peer pressure can be applied. And in science, there's a lot of peer pressure, right? Definitely. Like we discussed, like you want a doctorate, you want to get a piece of paper that makes you fancy. This is how you do it. And if you don't, well, the peer pressure, the other tool by your peers is the peer review, obviously. What is peer review other than a formalized peer pressure?
I mean, also too, with when it comes to like peer-reviewed stuff, a lot of that stuff can be like faked as well. Like, for what I've learned is that you can just, you know, if you want to get an idea, you can just sort of publish your stuff in a lot of like bogus journals, or even make up a journal, then consider it legitimate. So there's a lot of like that aspect of it too, where it's like these kind of, I don't know. Okay, I lost my train of thought there, but see.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of rigging that's happening, and it's orchestrated. There's definitely some kind of a system there, and so I think that's a very interesting look at it as well. How much of what's presented to us as being legitimate is illegitimate. It's the same like the financial system, right? It's presented as being legitimate, but when you look at it, it's illegitimate. It's based on theft. It's based on technically a crime, but they've sort of found loopholes in the law to make what they're doing not illegal. And I saw a really good thing on TikTok just recently. When I turned on my TikTok, it was right on my front page, and it was a presidential one of the members of the cabinet. Do they call them cabinets, senators, whatever, in the US, that is related to the central bank, and he was talking about how the banks create money, which is actually a lie. So they're allowed to go on like primetime news television, on primetime shows that they're being interviewed. And the interview asked him some really clever questions. Like, okay, so if the government prints money, why do they have to lend money? And to watch this guy squirm, and he tried to like squirm this way and squirm that way, he couldn't really answer that question. Yeah, well, it's very complicated, actually. It's a very complex system. And he started getting confused and flustered, and he was like asking, like, is that true? Is that how it works? I think that's how it works. He didn't really know what he was talking about. He was so swept aside from one simple question of like, well, if the government creates money, why do they have to lend it? Well, the first lie that he told was that the government creates money. They don't create money. They give permission to the central bank to create money. The central bank creates money. Then the government lends the money from the central bank. But because the government gave the order to create the money, they're considering themselves the creator of the money, so they can speak like that. But when they're asked that one simple question, they're stuck. So I think science also has like little loopholes like this, what you're talking about, you know? And I think everything that we're living in has become a lie. I think we're living in an age of lies. And I'll say this because of the media, right? Let's look at it from a social perspective for a moment. The way in which we've been indoctrinated by the religion and the religion of science, or science that acts as a kind of a quasi kind of a religious structure, as a cult. I call science a cult. And not all science is a cult, but popular science has become a cult because everybody has been inducted into the cult, and they will carry the line of the cult, and they will protect the cult. And if you say something that challenges the cult, you'll be ostracized or attacked. In the old days, if you went across against your church, you'd be kicked out of the community. You'd be ostracized. So there's scientific ostracization, and people will consider you a kook, and they won't want to associate with you, right? If your ideas are too far out.
Let's take it in another direction. I've been thinking that, like, if we're talking about the evolution of science as a religion, I can't help but think about like Karl Marx and Marxism, who he thought like his whole idea was like a science. He thought of his stuff as a science. This was before like, you know, science as we know it. But that's kind of that framework of this sort of this was like this Hegelian sort of like momentum of history, where everything is kind of this upward escalator into history. That's also a very kind of religious aspect. And if you keep in mind with like, you know, in communist countries, they were so adamant on atheism that they would like send people to prison and even kill people who professed belief in God. Like that was like, it was that extreme. It was because if people believed in God, they wouldn't be reliant on the state. And that God threatened the authority of the state, which is why they try to eliminate it from society. So I think that if we want to talk about, you know, science as a religion, I can't help but feel like that sort of Marxist sort of like pseudo scientific orientation doesn't have some bearing onto, isn't a player or a variable in this particular situation in regards to science.
So true. Welcome back, dear Indy. I get a feeling that you're going to be on track now.
Yeah, I think I got it figured out. It's going to be a little better here on out.
One question before you get going. For the ladies, are you wearing your shirt? because Indy is our lady magnet. Indy, he's always like, you got to have some eye candy. Indy is our eye candy. Even my girlfriend says like, oh, the last show, Indy didn't take his shirt off.
I just try to get a lot of sun out here. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a nudist. But I love being shirtless. People always joke about, wow, you're wearing a shirt. They're always telling me about that. When they see me with the shirt on, they don't recognize me at first.
I don't know if
Yeah,
you followed the conversation because of your connectivity, but we were just talking about how religion is a cult and how science is a cult as well, and how the cult of science is basically, you know, people get ostracized, they get controlled, and how there's a social narrative in our society that if your ideas of reality go too far away from the norms of science, people call you a kook and crazy. And I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that, or a new thing that you want to add. You mentioned some really cool stuff when we were in the chat.
Yeah, there's some things about the stuff that we're talking about now. There's some things about science and religion that are integrative. I feel like science is kind of an offspring of religion in some ways, but it has kind of bifurcated away from it in a lot of ways as well. So there's, especially as far as evolutionary things go, but there is different type of views in religion. Some are more integrative of evolution, but a lot of them are not. So, but there's a lot of things in science that are supposedly based on the foundation of God from Cartesian meditations, during which Rene Descartes went to help for the Queen understand philosophically what can be known for as truth. And without the faith in God, he said we can't know anything. We can only know that this could be a delusion or dream of an evil deceiver that's deceiving us in a nightmare or a dream. But he knew that we could establish a foundation of assertion of it's really not being able to achieve absolute truth, but being able to work towards absolute truth, towards the absolute truth of God um with our means that we have as humans. There's a model that was established by Einstein, the God model, where God has absolute truth, and we're never going to reach that absolute truth, but we're always striving to achieve more to reach towards that truth. And so through empiricism, they established a way to reach towards that absolute truth by comparing our observations with one another to overcome our misperceptions of the absolute truth that we see. For example, like things of the model of the heliocentric model or something, ways people have aspired towards reaching beyond just seeing things the way it looks from our eyes, but seeing things from a perspective beyond the subjective mind. So in a lot of ways, things are the way they seem to us. You can't deny that things might seem a certain way, but they're not. Like, for example, when we see air does not have an appearance unless there's smoke, a lot of times. So when we view into the ether or the space, outer space, how is it to know? How are we to know that there's not air there? And some people are of the understanding that that's water in the ether, but I feel like there's many things that are beyond our perception that we've been able to understand, like different frequencies of vibration beyond the visual spectrum and things of the sort that have been understood through science. But I feel like ultimately, without the alchemistic understanding of integrating spiritual understanding of the capabilities of our conscious reality versus the material reality, through conscious exploration, we can achieve so much greater depth of of spans through which we can explore through time and space, through different dimensions of exploration. It's unfathomable. So it would make a lot of sense that that's more of a foundational aspect, and that the matter comes from the mind and was maybe designed or facilitated by the mind. But there's the Aristotelian view that the mind only comes from the body, and when the body dies, the mind dies with it. So people are of different philosophical views on this, and I like to keep an open mind and be able to consider both or beyond.
I think that is what is supposed to be the fundamental precept of science. And I think that is true science, is keeping that open mind. But it seems that the powers that be have weaponized science. How's that for a way of looking at things? The powers that be have weaponized science to keep us in a little box so that we're easily controlled because we don't understand the world we're living in. And so they have specifically gone out of their way to hide truths from us, to lie to us about true science, to lie to us about history, which is another science. History is one of the sciences. They've lied to us about our history. They've changed certain historical facts. They are evolving history in front of our eyes. All these new experts come along and go, oh, we've got a much better idea of what happened last year. Yeah, but John was there. He saw it. Never mind John. Never mind that he was standing there and he saw it. We've got a better idea. So let's take the first-hand experts out of the question because they're not important. We'll figure it out. That attitude of the supremacy of our science is so much better than what was before. I think is a part of the arrogant attitude which has produced the ignorance that is driving the cult of religion. So, I mean, the cult of science. So there is true science, like what you're talking about, which is actually science. And then there is the cult of science that has been weaponized by the structures. And why has it been weaponized? Well, we've got to get back to the financial matters. Again, we can't walk away from money because it controls everything. There's a lot of money in weapon research. Weapons is mostly what our science is researching. So we're living in a world where, you know, R&D is a big expense and technology is financialized. So controlling technology is controlling money, is controlling the world, is controlling military development of different countries, is controlling whether or not you can push them under your thumb and squash them. So there have been certain powerful interests that have wanted to keep the science hidden for personal greed-based reasons and have put it under banners of national protection. And so all countries are basically doing this. It's just sort of a normal national practice. So what I remember being taught was that because of national security, most science is about 25 years behind. So if you have discovered something now in the scientific community, it was known 25 years ago by the government or the shadow government or those that are involved in these, you know, national security programs, which is a very small percentage of those that govern us, in fairness, because like Kennedy didn't like the fact that he didn't have access to this information. And, you know, it seems like he paid the price. So if we talk about science, we've got to talk about Kennedy. We've got to talk about people that paid prices because they challenged the status quo. Kennedy wanted to change the system of information, wanted to allow a lot of the science that was known secretly by governments to be revealed to the people. And once again, this Tesla was ostracized. He was cautioned. He was controlled because he wanted to produce free energy. And he's not the only one. I mean, he's just one of the names that we all know. There have been a lot of people. I think we need to look at that. What do you think?
Absolutely. There's something very suspicious about that. But you got to think Galileo was contested at his time. And how long did it take after he was excommunicated and jailed up for so long and throughout his whole life? And then after he died, probably for a long time, his ideas weren't really accepted or understood to their greatness. But Tesla, we're still reeling on trying to be able to understand some of the stuff he was able to do, and certain people have been able to bring that stuff back, like the guy who built the Coral Castle. Can't think of his name. It's kind of a obscure name, but yeah, that was an amazing feat. He was able to use, I think, cymatics to be able to make things weightless. But whether that was something from Tesla or something from ancient sciences of megalithic builders, we don't really know. But it was something great that we see people being able to get that kind of stuff back. They're never really able to convey their real knowledge to the public. It just gets lost in the shuffle and taken away by the establishment.
I just had an interesting thought that in regards to the narrative that science sort of produces about the world, I think it actually reinforces linear time. And let me explain why. Because I think about like the progression of technology, and that we started off as primitive, and then we evolved more and more into a technological society we have today. But what's interesting about the Atlantis narratives, or the ancient people who had advanced technology, whether you believe that's true or not, it kind of paints an interesting narrative where it's like that sense of progress is no longer going from left to right. It seems like it's more like the high technological advances are sort of on the edges of time, where it's like it's in the deep past and the deep future, and we're sort of in the middle. I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting. The interesting thought that just came into my head. The idea that you look at something like Atlantis or the Lemurians or one of those advanced ancient societies, it kind of creates a different kind of like that linear narrative no longer makes sense, is what I'm saying. It's more like when it comes to progress. So that's another aspect of belief in the cult of science, is this upward scaling upward of progress, that we're going to become more like, we're going to sort of evolve. It's not going to have peaks and valleys. It's not going to go backwards or forwards. And the idea is that, we were so primitive back then, and look how advanced we are now. Isn't it great? We have like science, and look at the dark ages. Look how everything was so terrible back then without science. But if you kind of look into sort of like the Graham Hancock kind of stuff seriously, about like there being a lost ancient civilization, that kind of pokes a lot of holes into that particular narrative.
Yeah, that's an interesting view on that. And yeah, I feel that there's definitely a lot of like understanding about lost high technology, and like a look forward towards like high technology to like explore space. We really don't know how a lot of things were done in the past, but I feel like you have to also consider a breakaway civilization possibility, where there is that hidden breakaway civilization that's either here, or maybe had gone to the stars or moon or Mars, or we don't really know. That's a possibility that it's around, maybe here with us in the inner Earth, or possibly hollow Earth. We don't really know, but we do know that there's amazing technology before our eyes, even today, of higher beings. We could say we don't know if it's higher beings. We do speculate that it is. People claim to have seen them. Some people claim that those are actually droids or robots, the ones with the bigger eyes. But we have to consider that there are higher beings that may have been more closely available to us and within the collective's knowledge of their being, and then oversaw us for a while, and that may be that they're overseeing us from a distance now. Some people claim that they're overseeing us from the deep underground military bases. So there's a lot of ideas about this, and there's a lot of knowledge about this being thrown around, and there's definitely a lot of witnesses of UFOs and stuff.
I think that's very interesting, and I think it's very on point. And I think the questions that Cosmic asks and the ideas that he presents needs to be considered. And I'm going to do an imagination exercise with us here. So
Cool.
buckle in, peeps. This is going to be a bit of a wild ride. Disclaimer. This is not science. This is not proved. This is just me going out on a limb. But just to give you an idea of what could be true, because we don't know. Imagine for a moment that history was written by the victors. Oh, hold on. That's what they tell us in history class, right? So that's what I was taught in history class, that the winners of every war wrote down history and got to dictate what history was. So that's the common understanding of history as it's been taught to me in my school. And as I've read about it and come across, it's been reiterated that history has been the legacy of those that conquered, the legacy of the winners. So what if there was a civil war long ago? We don't know how long ago. They might have changed the dates. They might have added on 1,000 years. They might have created dark ages out of nothing. We don't know. But what if there was a kind of a civil war? And that civil war involved a cult, which was the cult of science in those days, which has become the cult of religion. Let's just say different kind of science that became the cult of religion. And that the witch burnings, as we know it, it happened, but it happened in a slightly different way. And that people had high technology in those days, that they hid it from us, which is very plausible and possible, because if there were things made out of steel, they would have dissolved, right? If there were steel cars, they would have dissolved. If there was, lots of glass being made and big buildings, they would have broken down to form deserts, sand, silica sand deserts. So if concrete had a high silicon content in those days and it all eroded, it would have become deserts. So we don't know what's the true history. So what if possibly that in ancient history, humanity was enslaved by a cult, and that cult indoctrinated a new form of religion, and that religion became known as Catholicism, and they banned people from being allowed to read. Okay, well, we've heard about this story, people not being allowed to read. And they forced people not to be allowed to know and not to be allowed to tell stories about the past that weren't in the book, right? At pain of death to yourself and your family and having your property removed from you. And then, if not killed and tortured, at least excommunicated to go and live out there and die. So there might have been a lot of powerful incentive for people to just shut up, not read, because you're not allowed to read. If you get caught reading with a book, you're in trouble. Books were confiscated from people. We hear about the story of all the burnings of books, Alexandria. What we know as history is the story that was told to us, that was dictated by the winners, the Romans, so-called Romans, ancient Greeks, whoever you want to call. So we've been told this story by those that won the civil war, potentially. This is just going out on a limb as a fantasy adventure, but it could be true. And that history has had science all along, and that high technology was never really lost. It was taken away from the people and hidden in the archives of a place called Vatican, hypothetically. And that we've got all this ancient knowledge of science hidden in these archives. And they've been waiting for the right time to allow it out. But first, people had to be trained. People had to be indoctrinated and controlled the way they think to prepare people to the point where they will accept transhumanism as an agenda. And now that people are psychologically softened up from centuries of psychological abuse of sorts and harassment by cult indoctrination, people's collective psyche are so fractured and harmed that people are ready to start accepting whatever we're told. And so the cult of religion was replaced by the cult of science, used as a weaponized system. And that all of these advances have also not just happened by chance. Because when we look at all of the great scientists, did they or did they not have affiliation to the Masons and secret mystery organizations? Do we not see this pattern? And so these secret organizations, were they not connected to possibly the archives? Did they have access to the archives? We know that the Masons was connected to the Pope. We know that it was started as a wing of the Catholics, as the Knights of Christ. So they had access to the archives. And so they knew the true science of spirit and how the consciousness is the driving force behind matter. And maybe they needed us to stop believing that consciousness is the driving force behind matter so that we can start to think in a mechanical way in order for us to accept that we are going to be transformed and turned into a new design, a new creation. And that this transhumanism that is so fast becoming the norm is an agenda that is being carried over for centuries, where our history was hidden from us. The mud flood was hidden from us. The fact that there were cities with lighting and technology, who built all these wonderful, amazing architecture. We were told it was done with copper chisels and people who didn't know what they were doing, and that the pyramids were built with people by pulling logs around, and all the nonsense that they've spouted at us was by design in order to dumb us down. And now that we've been sufficiently dumbed down, because we were the ones that brought about all the technology. So the human race was highly intelligent. We had excellent pineal glands. What can we see in the record of physiology? Well, they tell us that the pineal gland has been shrinking, and it shrank. It's now a quarter of the size from what it used to be in ancient times. So we have to take their word for it that their testing systems are accurate, that really are ancient. Maybe it's 500 years that they've shrank our pineal gland to a quarter of what it used to be, dumbed us down. We don't know. Maybe much of the science that's been taught to us has been taught in such a way as to make us believe certain things in order to be able to push certain narratives on us, so that by dumbing us down, they could get us to become subservient to their system, and then install financial systems, educational systems, systems of governmental control over us, restricting our movement between countries, putting our borders where there never used to be so many limits, where we used to be a free people that could go anywhere we wanted on the planet and think and believe whatever we wanted to think and believe. But set by set, they restricted our movements. They restricted our ability to think freely and hid the technology away from us. And then when it got to the point where people like Kennedy figured out, hold on, there's a whole lot of stuff hidden from humanity. They need to know people were assassinated. I'm just saying this could be part of the narrative. And that national security interests were created with secret services and CIA and MI5 and Mossad, and all these organizations were created in order to hide intelligence from us. Why is it called intelligence? Have we been dumbed down? Are we not allowed to have intelligence? Are we not allowed to know the truth about our history? Has science never actually been a way? Did they put us into the dark ages specifically to dumb us down while hiding the science away in archives so that they could, at a later stage, reinvent a lot of the science? And once they had brought enough of the science back into the popular community, it would start to recapture its momentum. But maybe a lot of the really great inventions like fiber optics came from other places. Let's look at Facebook. Who takes credit for creating Facebook, right? We know who takes credit for it. But when we look at the facts, it was a shell company of the CIA that funded the beginnings of Facebook. So Is the so-called CEO of Facebook just a puppet that was put in there? Could many of the people that have been responsible for some of the great inventions have been puppets that were put in there in order to take credit for something? We've heard that Einstein was a puppet that was put in to take credit for much of the old science. Was the old science something that has always been around? I don't know the answers to all these questions, but I think we need to let these questions be and let them exist, because I think that they might have certain elements of relevance. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Indy, I'm kind of intrigued by the those notes you posted in the Telegram chat. Do you mind explaining that a little bit and what you were writing down there? It's kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, I've been working on an integration theory of astrophysics and particle physics, with quantum physics as like the integrative aspect. But I did have a spiritual vision, and I was able to see how the cosmos was created and what it consists of, and how those parts were amalgamated together. So in the notes, I wrote down a few basic things, but I actually have in the Telegram some pictures of the formulas that I've done. The formula of E equals mc squared is written down into a deeper equation that integrates this. But the idea is that everything is one, and that matter is actually space. And space used to be known as ether. And so the theory I call bundled ether theory, but I used to call wrinkled space theory, suggests that there was a point at which space became wrinkled or bundled and disturbed, and then those bundles became what we know today as atoms. And then those atoms are unraveling bundles, and as those atoms unravel, it creates half-lives of the atom, and they turn into isotopes with less electron shields. So they lose an electron over time as those bundles unravel, and those electrons become a thread. And so those threads are released, and ultimately those threads exist and then can be consumed by a black hole, at which point they will be unraveled into strings, and those strings will be emitted from the poles of the black hole as dark matter, and that dark matter will ultimately unravel into fibers that become ether. And so the ether is a fabric of fibers that is bundled into what we know as matter. And so that explains that since matter would be wrinkled space, that would be why it wrinkles space and bends space that moves near it. It kind of pulls it in because it's wrinkled up, bundled space. And so it also explains why the universe seems to be expanding as that dark matter is emitted and then unravels back into expansion of space. Things grow apart from each other as space expands. And then I also integrated the big crunch theory to the idea that once space is fully expanded and it's fully unraveled, it would then potentially collapse back upon itself and be the Big Bang and Big Crunch theory. But it's an integration of many different theories. But the main one I'm trying to look towards finding somebody who has credentials in a laboratory to look at it, would be able to take that formula and put it into practice and see if that comes out to yield some results. But the bundled ether theory suggests that everything that we are looking down closer to find these particles of is going to be more fields of energy, because it's really just there's no actual physical particle that's going to be there. It's going to be more shields and fields.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I try to bring those images through, but the moment I open Telegram here, it freezes and it crashes. I think it's because of the software that I'm running through Chrome. I'm not quite sure, but I'm working through Linux. So I think there might be bugs with the Telegram desktop. Maybe I need to get an update of the Telegram desktop, I'm guessing. Because it doesn't seem to be doing its job. But yeah, Indy, if you've got have you got a Telegram desktop installed on your device?
Yes. Let me see if I
Because
can pull it up.
should, yeah. Because it's very interesting. I'm still trying to close my Telegram. I can't even close it. It's ridiculous. Quit Telegram. That's what I need. There we go. There we go. I managed to quit Telegram. Wow, what a job! But yeah, that the bundling expressions of it seems like you're describing mechanisms of toric fields. Yeah, the way that a toric field springs from a
Yes.
toric field, and so there's a fractal nature to toric fields. That's what it sounded like to me when I was listening to what you were saying, and that the fractals of toric fields come from toric fields that come from toric fields, which makes perfect sense because then we've got the toric field of the etheric field from whence the toric field of matter comes, and the etheric toric field comes from the toric field of the astral toric field, which comes from the toric field of the. So now we're back to this concept of there being the three bodies, the three different bodies that present the physical body, back to Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu, if that makes sense, back to the Trinity. And that these three aspects each express four aspects, right? Bringing us to the 12 aspects, which is sort of fundamental to understanding the macrocosm. So we've even looked for our constellations to express these numerations. I mean, in truth, there could be infinite number of constellations, could there not? We've chosen to recognize those 12 constellations for a reason. So yeah, I do see that. I also wonder, probably a good time to get into this is the psychology. Because psychology is a science as well. And I think there's another element to be considered here is wokeism, and how wokeism in the modern day and age is basically it's attached itself to the arts. To me, art is a form of science. Science is a form of art. So, the arts have been under attack. The sciences have been under attack. The social sciences have been basically riddled with the proverbial worms of wokeism. And I think this wokeism isn't new. We've just named it and defined it because it's reached a crescendo to the point where humans are now expected to question whether they're men or women, right? Which has become quite a sore point from a financial perspective, because a lot of money is being poured into the medicine and the scientific research to facilitate this resexing of the human race, as we can call it. And to me, it seems like preparing young people for bionic implants, preparing young people to accept that for now we're going to put you on hormonal replacement, but soon the technology will exist for you to get an implant where you won't have to take hormonal replacement. We will put a piece of technology in your body that will change the way your hormones produce hormones. So we will be able to fundamentally change you from male to female. So I think that humans are being prepared step by step for the real technology that we don't know about, that is hidden. Where there's technology that could be put in the brain that changes the way that the brain affects the endocrine system and actually changes the way hormones are created. So let's go. Let's roll with it.
All right. I don't know if we lost Franklin or what's going on, but it seems like
No, I'm here. I've
We've
just
got-
put it on a full screen so people can see it.
okay, awesome. All right, so this is the E equals MC squared theory, and it's E equals MC squared when at still motion. But when in motion, PC comes into the equation, and then when I added into the equation is down below. So I've been able to take the E equals and move the E over to underneath the MC squared and make it a 1 equals this equation. But then my equation below is the equation of dark energy equals dark matter times the speed of dark light squared equals -1, and then together they create 0. So they cancel out to create the ether, which is the nothingness and the oneness. The equation below, I created symbols of my own. Okay, so it's upside down, mu, and backwards c. Are dark matter and the dark speed of light. And I think I put I don't know what the S was what's supposed to be. It says over here. Space. Okay, that's a space. So
Can I
that's a
ask
space
you?
or 0.
Um,
Yeah.
C is obviously the speed of light. What is P? Is P to do with momentum or what?
And P is momentum. Yeah. It says in the key over
Okay.
here. Yeah, P is the momentum that is gained from motion. So that when you're in motion, that changes the equation to P times the speed of light.
It does
Well, you
seem a
actually
little
have
bit
to.
sensible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an equationist, but it doesn't seem to be contradicting too much. It's very interesting what you've done here to bring it to 1. I haven't seen the connection to the -1 yet, but I'm sure that
The -1 is
S-
tetraionics. Tetraionics is a new view of physics where dark matter and dark energy operate on a triangular axis of this, whereas the matter that we live in and see and operate in is operating on the axis of this. And so they don't actually combine. They don't actually come into each other's realm. They operate next to each other, but do not experience each other. The dark matter and the matter. So it'd be like -1 and 1, in a sense that they're in like a ghost realm amongst us somewhat.
antimatter.
Yeah.
So it's like an alternate axis is kind of basically what you're getting at.
Yeah, makes sense.
And we see if they combine antimatter with matter, it turns the matter into, I think, energy, and it dissipates in strange ways. So it kind of cancels each other out or dismantles it or something. It's very strange.
Well, it holds true to the occult principles as above, so below. So antimatter should be proportional to matter,
Mhm.
but possibly vastly scaled in terms of like maybe the scale is the only thing that's different. But in an equation, the scale doesn't really come to pass, does it? Because the equation is just reflecting the principles, and the principles are based upon what is the value of C and the value of M, the value of momentum. So when we're looking at antimatter, can we have momentum in antimatter? It's an interesting concept.
Yeah. It's very interesting. But in physics, they're finding that there's a lot of more um, matter, or there's more material in the cosmos than's being accounted for. And so they're saying that that would be explained by dark matter at this point. And they've been able to obtain new footage of black holes from an X-ray perspective and lens, and we are able to see new motion of black holes that can explain that there's more going on there that meets the eye.
Well, yeah, that we were talking about that earlier on, and it's very much a big part of why Newtonian maths just doesn't really work properly because of that. That's what that whole Planck's constant's there to fix, isn't it? And it's a big number. It's a massive number. So I believe that the Planck's constant is a reflection of how much more energy there is than matter, if that makes sense. So we know there's a lot more energy than what there is matter. And by a lot more, we mean like, I reckon it's that ridiculous number, right? That number, which is how many? 6.6260715. Let's call it 6.63, rounded off, times 10 to the minus 34 joule hertz, right? Which is an incredible number. And I think it gives us the frequency of the resonant field of the vibrational spectrum of the universe. Does that make sense? Because joule hertz is speaking about frequency, mass frequency. Am I right or am I wrong?
It does.
Because hertz is frequency, and joule hertz is mass frequency, frequency of mass. And so this means that gravity must be based upon the joule hertz constant of that particular material. And so we don't have so much matter, so much energy present in the matter that we experience. I don't think that dark matter equates to it, because there would have to be, I believe, like so much more dark matter than matter. Does that make sense? There would have to be so much more dark matter that I would compare it to like I said to my son this morning on the mountain. I said to him, I picked up a rock and I said, this rock compared to the mountain. This is the kind of numbers we're talking about when we're talking about that ratio that I reflected earlier, right? That's 6.62. Let's put it on the screen as it reflects. So there's our. I used to call him the plonker. I used to call him plonk because it's like you fall on your butt when you look at that number. No, sorry, I done something wrong. Wrong. There we go. So let's get that right. There. That's the one that we're talking about. Yeah. That's a lot of joule seconds, right? And that's what you've got to rectify your equations with for Newtonian maths to exist, because they've considered the maths in a vacuum that only accounts for the known universe. And so that is the ratio that you need to fix it with in order to account for the whole universe, which means that you divide 1 by that number, and that's how much matter, energy is present in the known universe. So that's 1 divided by 626. 1 divided by 6.63 with 34 zeros, right? Which is a lot of, it's a lot of substance. And that is sort of like comparing a rock to a mountain, I think. What do you think? A rock that you can pick up in your hand to a mountain. It's like that. It's something that's so big that you can't compare the two. It's like, and so I was explaining to my son, what was I talking to him about? Something about science, and I was explaining to him about a rock compared to a mountain. Oh yeah, we were talking about Googleplex, because my son, he's learned about Googleplex. He's fascinated by the concept of Googleplex, and he was asking me, what's the difference between Google and Googleplex? And I said, well, if Google's a rock, Googleplex is the mountain. As a number, right? Because isn't Googleplex supposed to be the biggest number that there is?
I don't think there is I don't think there is a largest number, but I guess that's like one of the bigger numbers. Definitely, there might be bigger ones. Who knows? I'm not a mathematician.
But it's ridiculous, Googleplex, isn't it?
That's a ridiculously large number.
Like you'd need a book. You'd need to publish a book to write the number, wouldn't you? To put all the zeros in.
Probably like a volume of books.
So a rock in your hand compared to a mountain might be an accurate sort of ballpark estimation. Like it's just stupid. You can't compare a rock in your hand to a mountain that you're standing on. And so I think that that's a good way of looking at our physics. We've taken the rock as reality and ignored the mountain. How's that for a beautiful metaphor?
It's not bad.
Yeah, so I have this other document here that I put up, and it's just got more visual cues instead of letters and equations and numbers. But these also represent those letters and constants. And so here I have the matter and light representing love, and the dark matter and dark light. Matter and light representing light. My bad. And dark matter and dark light representing love. It said that love is blind sometimes, and oftentimes when we try to see things in the light, things don't always want to be fully exposed. So the light can expose things beyond their mystery, and the mysteries are important, and I think in love. But together they create the love light and the light love, as is known in the law of one. And I represented here in the middle that they create together Wu Wei, which is a philosophy of effortlessness and harmony, in which one goes with the flow and acts it within opportunity and understands the oneness of things and has compassion for others. So there's also on the bottom here mention of water and fire dichotomy and a dark and light dichotomy. Dark being knowledge, light being wisdom, compassion being water, and protection being fire. These are just some things I was playing around with, some ideas of the dichotomies of the yin and the yang. They're integrated, or could be integrated within these symbols. But I also wanted to mention earlier we were talking about what's the difference, what makes us different and individual. And I thought of the analogy of being a drop in the ocean. The drops are all part of the ocean, but they're individual. You know, some drops are on the crest of a wave, some drops are deep in the sea. They're all individual drops. Maybe it drops inside of a bubble. You know, but they're all part of a whole together. And so when we see the dichotomy of being able to see ourselves as separate or individual versus seeing ourselves as whole and unified or integrated, there's also that aspect of yin within the yang and yang within the yin. So even though we see ourselves as different than everyone else, we're in the same place to know that they're there together. Also, when we see ourselves as all together, we realize that we do have different perspectives and come from different experiences to see one another from the same origins and source. Kind of in such a way that a different rock and a different pebble have gone through different experiences from a mountain, but they're part of the mountain. Oh, you're muted, Franklin.
I'm sorry. I was telling my son I love him and good night, and he's a repetitive little guy. I unfortunately zoned out a little because my little boy came in because I had this little dog outside going, "Woo, woo, woo, woo." And my son's going to bed. It's 8:55. Cheeky. Whenever his mother, it's. I like to have him in bed at 8:30. You know.
Good.
But okay, it's not that bad. It's before 9, but still, it's. She doesn't have the same, discipline ideas as me, I think. I'm a Nazi, a Nazi dad. It's like, there's the right way. It's a cult, the cult of dad, you know? It's a religion. You go to bed at that time, my boy. It's the only way.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's good to have a healthy sleep schedule. That's very important.
Well, tomorrow morning we're climbing the mountain no matter what. I'll drag him out of bed if I have to.
Yeah, it's good. You can sleep within your circadian rhythm, how you're supposed to sleep. Like when it's dark, you're sleeping, and when it's light, you awaken. That's really magical. How
You've
you're
hit on
supposed to
a
operate, kind of.
very important point here as it
Yeah.
relates to science. We've become nocturnal. When we pursue our own thoughts and our own beliefs and our own ideas and our own ideologies and our own, we tend to do it at night as a society, as people. Or am I wrong? Because during the day, we're
Yeah.
9 to 5, we're working, earning money, right? Don't have time to think about God, spirituality, the universe, science, all of that. We go home and we read a book about science in bed or, on our day
And
off on the weekend.
bombarded by the energies of other people around us that are awake during the day. So there's not as much clarity.
Probably because during the day, I'm gonna take this into this point. There's more electricity in use. So our electrical system's more busy. Right? During the day, the washing machines are on, people's boilers are on. There's more electricity being used by industry, by companies. There's so much more happening during the day. At night, TVs are on and a few lights. Right? The fridge isn't using so much electricity because you've closed the fridge door and you're not opening it again. During the day, the fridge door is opening and closing. It's using more electricity. Think about it. The washing machine's going, the tumble dryer's going, this is going, and that's just in the house. When you go to a business, the whole business is open and there's things going on and things are happening, and the AC units are running because it's buildings full of people. And at night, the AC units go down to probably idle mode because there's nobody in the building. Right? They don't need to remove the oxygen and CO2 from like 1,000 people in the building. So the AC units probably use much less energy at night. If you imagine all those big skyscrapers. Because why would you need to remove the CO2? There must be health and safety limitations in the way that these AC units are run, right? If you're not got 1,000 people in the building, you don't need to remove the CO2 of 1,000 breathers. So that's why the building has got certified how many people are allowed to be in the building at once, right? Because the AC unit is calibrated to be able to remove the CO2 from so many people in order to replace the oxygen. So at night, if you've only got 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 security guards walking around in the building, you only need to have it certified for 10 people, which is a certain idling. It's like a car engine idling or a car engine like full tilting, I suppose, the amount of fuel you're going to use, right? If you're on the freeway and you're doing 100 miles an hour, are you allowed to do 100 miles an hour? 80 miles an hour. We're not on the Autobahn here, but you know what I mean. So it's interesting. I think that electrical and all the cars, there's a lot of cars running during the day. There's a lot of trucks. And so the static fields of the tar and the rubber, right, over our ley lines, generating these lines of energy and patterns of energy that are producing this current during the day, it must affect our consciousness field. And then the fact, the psychic quality of everybody being busy doing like linear tasks. Yeah. So the subconscious, universal subconscious is like devoted to linear tasks. Everybody's doing linear tasks. It's work related, linear tasks. Bottom line, make money. Like do this task, that task. So it's sort of, I think it all conglomerates to produce a different shift in consciousness, which is quite interesting that you mention it. But I think that the fact that everybody's become a nocturnal, I don't think it's healthy. I don't think we were meant to be nocturnal.
Yeah, I think it actually kind of goes back to the your whole talk about belief systems. I've been thinking about belief systems as collective mind spaces, and if you think, I was thinking about your analogy about talking about people, during the day, there's all this stuff going on. But I think another way to look at it is the idea that if you think of this universe as a sort of a collective dream space where everybody sort of collectively creates reality, if everyone around you is asleep, there's less people around you creating reality. So you have more free space to create your own reality and project things on top of it. I think this is why a lot of magicians and, witches and stuff, they do their magic practices at night, because it's like almost like there's less interference from like the consciousness of other people. So that's another way to look at it.
Well said.
I definitely think that. But now what's happening is a lot of people are staying up at night. Right? So in the old days, people all went to sleep with the sun. But now everybody's up at night, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people are up at night. So the average person goes to sleep at about what, midnight? 11? Would that be a fair estimate?
Yeah.
To go to sleep at 11 p.m. is not unusual. 11 to 12, not unusual. Wake up 7 a.m. Shower, coffee, breakfast, boom, 7:30, boom, work 8:30 a.m. starting work. Is that a sort of normal pattern for a lot of people? I would imagine. And a later night on average would be 12, and an earlier night would be 11:30.
I think so.
And
Some
if you think
people might
about it,
to wake up at 6. Some people wake up.
There will be.
Yeah.
There will be. But I'm thinking that most people probably stay up and watch more television. Well, am I wrong? Or let's put it this way: the younger generation, more so. It just seems that way because if you like most clubs, most bars, right? Most bars are open till 11:30, 12 if they close. Or am I wrong?
Yeah,
So
or
that's
even more.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Even 2 a.m., 3 a.m. But like a village, a small village, the local bar or local like bar in a small village would be like 11:30, 12, if
Mhm.
later, if not later. So probably 11 is not like that far from the norm. But you're right. There probably a lot of people, like particular tradesmen, that will wake up earlier to be at work. But
Bakers.
most of the people that work in shops, work in department stores. Department stores open at what, 8:30, 9. People who work in restaurants, people who work in car dealerships, salespeople. So a lot of people are salespeople. You know, the way I'm like imagining it, school teachers got to be at school at a particular time. Or if you imagine most businesses, if you work in a bank, you probably start work at about what? You got to be there by 8, 8:30. Bank will open at 9.
Yeah.
So you've got that certain amount, and you might be commuting for 45 minutes or half an hour. So you might have to leave home like almost an hour before you get to work, depends on where you live. In most cities, if you take it just as a standard, probably commuting on average is about 40 minutes, right? A half an hour commute is considered light because you've got to walk to your tube station or your train station or your bus, get your bus, wait for your bus, be on the bus 15, 20 minutes, maybe traffic 25 minutes, right? Or you drive there in traffic, right? I don't know. It's interesting, and I think that the way that the technology has been presented to us has been to keep us up at night, where it would be very easy for the world to start earlier, wouldn't it? It would be very easy for most businesses, instead of starting at 8 or 9, they could start at 7, and people could wake up at 5 and go to sleep at 8, right? But it's not how it
Yeah,
is. If it was like that, would we all be healthier?
I think so.
It's an interesting concept. So who chose the times? Who got to decide? Like, businesses start at 8, 9.
It's almost like now the time to get like freedom of like thought and like create your own reality the most would be the morning, because like people are up at night with you now, but they're passed out in the morning time. Not many are awake till like 9 or
Totally.
something or 10. Yeah.
Or any time between midnight and 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Those are the creative hours. I used to enjoy
Yes.
waking up to meditate at 3:30 a.m. in the morning. And I need to get myself back into a really good rhythm, because those are like, there's something very special if you wake up at that time of day, like 3, 4 in the morning. Very special time to be awake. So much creative potential, energy. And just means you got to go to sleep at like 8, 9, right?
Yeah.
If you go to sleep at 8, 9, it's actually really easy to wake up at 3, 3:30 in the morning, because it's just, you've had enough sleep. You're done sleeping. Like, you know, if you think about it, especially if you
They say
sleep
a lot
early
of
at
the
night.
yeah, a lot of the great thinkers were said to have like done a lot of their work at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. Time when they're the only ones up. I know
But
Tesla and yeah, Newton did that.
but we are structured in such a way that we don't get to enjoy that time of day, because if we're going to sleep on average at 11 p.m., 4 is a tricky situation, yeah, to do. Um, it's not easy, and it's taxing, especially if you spend your evening radiating your brain with television or, you know, um, digital entertainment. And so the brain has been like bashed around, dish, 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 dish. It's been backhanded. It's been like knocked from corner pillar to post. Now the poor brain is like, oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. It just wants to sleep. It doesn't want to get up. It's like 7 a.m. Oh, got to get out of bed. Oh, no. Funny thing is, when you get into a pattern of waking up at 3, 4 in the morning, you wake up like this. Interesting. You don't wake up like, you wake up like this.
It's so true.
Bow.
Yeah.
And you're awake and your brain is like, right, let's do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like spits out a receipt. Ching, ching, zzz, like the plan for the day. Zoom, it's done. We know what we're doing. We know where we're going. It's clear. You wake up so clear. You know exactly where you just were when you were asleep. Like, oh, I was over there. Funny, I was in my sleep. I was thinking about that. Funny, I was having that experience in my sleep. You know what I mean? So, you know, how does this relate to the conversation? Has our lifestyle been affected by the technology that's been presented to us? And a lot of our technology seems to be about this digital stuff. So we've got to ask ourselves, is that part of the religious cult? To provide us with dangerous technology, cell phones, to help change our brain algorithms. What's her name?
This is Peanut. He's a boy.
He's a boy. Peanut. Look at little Peanut, hey? Peanut. Peanut.
He's tired of
Hi.
he's a little he's 5.
You see my Malamute getting jealous in the background. Coming out, it's like, who are you talking to? Like, I'm cheating on him. He's hilarious. He literally came here to check and see who I'm talking to. Because is there another dog around? No. You don't get friendly with another dog. I'm your dog, you know. Malamutes are like that. They're very possessive. Crazy dogs. But
They're beautiful.
yeah, so what was the other thing that I wanted to get into? Okay. So we got 3 hours and 7 minutes on the clock. Let's talk about the endocannabinoid system. So physiology. We've looked at a bit of physics. Okay. Let's look at a bit of biochemistry and physiology, the endocannabinoid system, and junk DNA. Right. So they've taught us that most of our DNA is junk and that ancestral memory isn't real. Something not adding up there for me. It's not just because I'm shaman. it's like I make a living out of this stuff, man. You know, it's got to be real. So it's not all just delusions that we're experiencing, you know, but they would want us to believe that because of the cult of psychology. Or am I wrong? So it's almost like the cult of psychology was set up in order to prevent us from understanding what the DNA really is. Because when we start looking at the idea of ancestral memory as being like fundamental to all indigenous cultures. Yeah, in Africa, every indigenous group, every indigenous culture has this belief. And the Aborigines and the North Americans and the Celtic people of Ireland had this belief as well of ancestral memory being passed down. So it seems to be, and in India, it's a big part of the, you know, the Akashic field is a sort of a doorway into ancestral memory and consciousness. So what do you think of this? What do you guys think?
You know, it's interesting you mentioned psychology. I don't know right where this the survey was, or even if it was a survey, but it's interesting that if you look at all the different scientific fields, whether it be science, biology, mathematics, if you want to understand the field that has the highest amount of, like, you know, materialist skeptics types, it's the psychologists. Because the thing about psychology is that you pretty much spend your entire time like thinking of all the ways that your brain can trick yourself. So then because of that, you become a lot more paranoid about your intuition because like, oh my God, is this confirmation bias? Am I just like, like am I just tricking myself? So you always think that you're tricking yourself, and you never really actually trust yourself and your own intuition because you're always paranoid that, oh my God, maybe I'm being delusional. Maybe there's this sleight of hand technique that I've been sort of fooled by. And because they framed things that way, that's one of the reasons why this go. Another big thing is actually stage magic. I don't know if I'm sure you're probably familiar with James Randi, and he had this whole he was a stage magician, and he had this Randi challenge where it was like, you got to pay if you can prove that supernatural phenomena is real. I'll pay you $1 million. But the thing was that it was totally like unscientific. It was basically just if he decided, James Randi guy, if he decided it was himself. But if we're talking about science, and like we're talking about how, like, I think here's an interesting caveat: the idea that science actually has its own form of magic that it uses to hypnotize people with. The thing about what stage magic does, when you do stage magic, you do all sorts of things. You make things teleport, you make things appear out of thin air, you do physical acts that may be impossible. You impale somebody with a sword and they come out totally unscathed. But the thing is, what that does is then when you find something that's spiritual or supernatural, your then assumption is to say that supernatural phenomenon is like that faked stage phenomenon. So you think, oh, if there's a mundane explanation for why I made a rabbit pop out of a hat, then there also must be this kind of conventional mundane explanation for things like spirits, gods, visions, and so forth. And so that kind of magic. Here's what we're going to talk about: science and religion. We talk about psychology. I'm talking about stage magic. Which literally, what's interesting is because it's almost like they're literally casting a spell of materialism. And I think that the third thing I wanted to mention are science influencers. These people like your Carl Sagans, your Neil deGrasse Tysons, who actually, because if you watch some of these, like I was watching one of these Neil deGrasse Tyson space programs. It was one of the most like laughably pretentious things I've ever seen. It's just this guy just basically stroking his own ego for an entire hour. But it's this idea that it's not just that science presents this this factual mechanical world. They try to romanticize it. They try to enchant you with like, oh, isn't it so wonderful that we've been created by a material universe, but it's okay that there's no God because stars are so pretty and planets are so cool looking. And it's like, and they'll have all this dramatic music behind it. So I think we're talking about, like, going back to the whole subject of science as a religion, we also have to talk about the cultural sort of theater of science. And I think what I want to talk about, and maybe you can further extrapolate on this, Indy or Shaman, is the idea that this science that we're talking about has its own form of magic that it uses to hypnotize people. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, we'll let in. Oh, Indy, would you like to respond?
I feel like the peer-reviewed study requirement for something to be knowledge or truth is ridiculous. I think that's good that things can be peer-reviewed and that they can be shown to have objective, significant statistic accuracy and effectiveness. But I've found that now that actually they finally published a study that vitamins are effective in a peer-reviewed study, the first time ever. But for so long, people have always said, there's no studies that vitamins even do anything good. And for me, I practice using vitamins and they've helped me tremendously. It's preventative medicine, so it's something that's you have to take a lot more time to understand what your body needs, what's going to be good for you, what's going to be potentially bad for you or a bad combination. There's a lot involved with using preventative medicine. It's very in-depth process, but I feel like now that they've shown that vitamin E and what was the other one? Yeah, omega-3 rich fatty acids, like fish oil and vitamin E, have been found to be effective at helping people with preventing heart disease, amongst other things. But for people that have practiced holistic medicine their whole lives, and they know the effectiveness of it, it's very frustrating for people to be in denial of the effectiveness of holistic medicine without a peer-reviewed study. But it's, helpful that now they're starting to allow that. I was surprised to see it. But in Switzerland, they've been finally allowing holistic naturopathic medicine to be covered by insurance. So it's starting to be something that's led by science in at least that nation, which is hopeful.
I think you're completely right in that. What do they call it? RDA, recommended daily allowance, all that nonsense. Because they want us nutritioned. They want us malnutritioned. Because the medical industry revolves around malnutrition in one form or another. Because if you have some kind of malnutrition, it will come up as a symptom that they can then treat and sell you medicine for. Or am I wrong? What do you think about that as a notion? Because in my mind, if you're not getting the correct nutrition and the correct vitamin balances that you require, then maybe your kidneys will be weak or your liver will suffer, because every different organ requires different mineral, nutritional, vitamin balances in order to be optimal. And so if you can cause malnutrition by genetically modifying food, by spraying chemicals, hazardous toxic chemicals onto food that will disturb the digestive process and also get in the way of nutrition being extracted from the food because of toxification, then you can disturb the nutritional levels in human beings. And very often, when people are suffering with low nutrition, they end up getting sick, right? And it's very hard to know if you're getting sick because of poor nutrition. So the doctors automatically having been brainwashed by the cult of science and having not been trained in nutrition, because nutrition has got nothing to do with health, correct? So the people we go to help us with our health know nothing about nutrition. It's sort of like going to a car mechanic that knows absolutely nothing about car engines. I can't believe my mom. Hi,
Luckily,
Mom.
they
I'm
have
on a live show. Love you.
medicine called functional medicine or integrative medicine, which is mostly food and diet and exercise and lifestyle based prescriptions. They do give you those first. They'll also test different levels of your hormone levels, different levels of essential vitamins, and different levels of neurotransmitters and things that you wouldn't really get at a regular doctor. So if you go to an integrative doctor, it integrates Eastern and Western medicine. So they'll write out a prescription for you to like maybe try an elimination diet, try not to eat dairy for a week and see how it does for you. They've been able to find that not only does a lot of times a dietary change eliminate the problem, a lot of times it'll also eliminate other issues that they didn't really feel like we could have any way to address. Like they'll heal like a gut issue that will heal mental illness too. So they've been finding that it's really amazing. We see a lot of that with naturopathic remedies. Like it'll have extra side effects that help other things instead of hinder them. They can have hindering side effects sometimes, but it's more common for them to help more things than you're trying to do, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think they've lied to us about a lot of things. They've told us that we need a lot of calcium, right, for our bones. But actually, you don't need a lot of calcium. You need like 12 minerals for your bones, right? Calcium's one of them. And so, like a plant, if you give a plant macro doses of certain, like your NPK is an example, like your nitrogen, potassium, and nitrogen,
Phosphate.
potassium, and phosphorus, for example, right? For your cycles of your growth. If you don't give the plant all the micronutrients that it needs, right, it gets sick. It will produce fruit, it will flower, it will do what it's meant to do, it will look perfectly fine, but the pests will eat it. Pests will be all over that plant because the cell walls won't be strong enough. If you give the plant too much calcium, it will cause another imbalance. It will lock it out of something else, phosphorus, that it needs. It will change the pH of the soil so it won't be able to absorb nitrogen effectively. So it will stunt the plant's growth. Whatever. There's like a lot of different ways. And humans are very similar. So they've sort of told us that you need this RDA, you need that, this. And one just has to question that like severely. A lot of the things they tell us, like, okay, an obvious one, vitamin C. You don't need a lot of vitamin C. In fact, you mustn't have too much of it. Come on. When I was a kid, we were taught that vitamin C is good. And the more of it you put in your body, the better, because you can't OD on vitamin C, right? But now there's a limit to how much vitamin C you're allowed to take in. When did we become that stupid that we threw out the science that they taught us, that we knew was true? That we knew that, like I was taught in school, that your body cannot absorb more vitamin C than what it needs. So the more vitamin C you put in, the better. So the more fruit that you eat, the healthier you're going to be. Obviously, there's a limit to how much sugar you want to put in your body. So if you're eating so much fruit that you're taking in like ridiculous amounts of sugar, then there's going to be a side effect. But my point is, I think they've lied to us about nutrition in a big way. And it's very interesting.
Well, I don't have much to say on that, but one thing I do have to say in regards to how cults operate, one method of indoctrination that I'm aware of is to give the members a low protein diet so that they can't think clearly. And then the other thing that they want to do is that you have a very busy and rigid schedule. You're constantly doing stuff, so you never actually have time to like sit and think, hey, maybe this idea doesn't make sense. So they just kind of like, they make you sing, they make you walk around and dance, they make you do all this stuff. And I think there's definitely some parallels to society in that regard, and that people are just so busy that they don't have time to think and question things.
I think you're right about us being kept busy jumping through hoops. It's like it's part of the science. So what have we got up here? Indy.
Yeah, they're saying that you're going to get an upset stomach, diarrhea, and kidney stones potentially. But they do say that the side effects of vitamin C are rare. But it says because the body cannot store the vitamin C.
I think this is probably more like when they talk about like vitamin C, like overdose. I don't think they're talking about like eating a bunch of fruit. I think it's more. I've heard somewhere that if you take like a bunch of vitamin C capsules, that it can like really mess up your stomach. Where you take all that vitamin C, you concentrate that into a pill. So I think probably not just you probably won't OD on it from like eating fruit, but I've heard. I think from like Trip Reports or something where people would try to use like vitamin C to potentiate the drug that they're using, and that caused them like massive stomach problems. It could be the drug too. I don't know.
And I've heard that there's different qualities of vitamin C. Like citric acid is like not always just citric acid. Like it's that process that it goes through can lead to like different qualities of it. But I think there's like different vitamin C's than you get that are ingredients in food a lot of times. I've heard that they're like an industrial waste product version of like vitamins that they put in a lot of processed foods. So you have to consider that. But I know vitamin C is considered to be essential for the absorption of iron. So I think they've forgotten to tell us like you need to take vitamin C with iron. You need to take calcium with phosphorus. Things like the combinations are being left out, and so that leads to imbalances. And that confusion weakens us. But when we learn about this stuff, we're able to share that information. It can really help. I know that dairy products have shown to leach calcium from our bones. So it's illegal for them to say that milk does a body good now. And they found that people that don't take dairy products have a lower incidence of bone fractures. When they did a study of people, those people were in Asia.
All right, I'm gonna have to leave now, but I just wanted to thank Bush Whisperer for inviting me on the talk once again. Indy, it's always been a pleasure. Really impressed by those equations you were showing earlier. I didn't know you were like that keen on like physics like that. So that's kind of interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, I channel a lot of stuff.
All right. Well,
I did a lot.
well, peace and love
Thank you,
to all
dear
you guys,
Cosmic.
and yeah, it's always been a pleasure being here. Peace out, everybody.
An honor and a pleasure to have you. Take it easy.
Yep.
Go smooth. Go well. Go happy. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. See
Ball
you
in
guys
the house.
later.
Great to have you. Thanks
Yes,
for your comments.
I think what you were saying is very interesting. You know, that they've presented vitamin C as being this demon almost. And I think what Cosmic says is true, because maybe the vitamin C that they give us is too concentrated, you know? Like
Mhm.
if you imagine like foods that give you a lot of vitamin C, right? Lemon as an example. You can drink a lot of lemon juice. It doesn't upset your stomach. As long as you're drinking a lot of water, right? Like me and my boy, we will knock back a whole lemon, just one shot. Like squeeze one lemon for him, one lemon for me, shot in the glass, water, boom. And then we can do that like 3 times in a day. I can eat 3 lemons in a day just because the juice is so nice, it's tasty. And can have a smoothie in the morning consisting of a fair whack of fruit, right? And satsuma or 2 during the day. If you think of the amount of vitamin C you can take in naturally with fruit, and if you have a tomato with your salad later on, for example, there's more vitamin C being taken in. And then there's even vitamin C in potatoes and vegetables. If you stir fry your vegetables, you don't overcook them, right? You're taking in vitamin C in a lot of these things. So if you're eating really well, I think you're taking a lot of vitamin C. I think I take in a lot of vitamin C, like more than the RDA amount that they're telling me I shouldn't take, if that makes sense. Like I should be walking around in pain, dying. But where do they get their vitamin C from? Which is an interesting point. And like you
Yeah.
mentioned, iron needs vitamin C. So
Yeah.
if you like alchemy, it's like I can give you a handful of chilies and you eat it now and you're going to crap yourself. But if I take that handful of chilies and I mix it with a plate of food, right, that I've prepared, because of the other things I put in, it will balance. Does that make sense? And it will actually be nice. Do you eat chilies?
Peppers are a great source of vitamin C. I love chilies.
Exactly. Me, I can eat chilies raw. Like, my gosh, I'm ridiculous, man. I can eat a plate of chilies raw on the side of my plate of food. I can go excessive on chilies because I love chilies. I love the endorphin hit. It's like to the point where I can eat a bowl of devil chilies with my food, right? Those are pretty hot. The tiny little green ones, the ones they use in Thai curry.
Yeah.
I eat those raw, like a whole chili in a mouthful of food, and I'll go through a bowl of them. But it's a lot of vitamin C. I'm telling you, even the chilies don't hurt me. So I think it's, if your body's used to, it's like I was explaining to someone about sun gazing. Himalayan rock salt. I eat a lot of black salt, kala namak, Himalayan rock salt, and I find it's beneficial, right? Because it's not just um, sodium chloride. It's got a whole range of. Did you know that black Himalayan rock salt has got a fair whack of soluble iron in it?
Yeah, it's got a lot of trace minerals in there. That's awesome.
So,
And-
but it's iron that doesn't have to be processed. It's literally water soluble iron. It just goes straight into your body. So you can actually take quite a lot of Himalayan rock salt, and that stuff goes into your bones. It's got so many minerals that fill your bones with so much good stuff. All those tissue salts. I was having this conversation with Mexico because we're talking about tissue salts earlier today, and it's interesting, like that we are getting given so much sodium chloride salt, right? Instead of sea salt. Don't you find that fascinating? Because sea salt isn't as common as it should be. We shouldn't be getting salt from anywhere but the sea, should we?
Anyway,
If
about
you
the
think
what?
about all the trace elements. Yeah.
I try to get the best water I could get. We got mountain spring water out here. It's amazing. So I don't drink my water here at the house. So I get city water.
Yeah, if we could try not to call each other demons, it probably is a good idea. I don't think there's any demons here. I think we're all just human beings. And we've all got different opinions, which is great. We all must have different opinions. Imagine we all had the same opinion. Gosh, life would be boring, wouldn't it? It'd be like living in an AI matrix where we all like have the same ideas and same beliefs. It would almost be scary and twisted and weird. So thank God that we disagree, because it makes life interesting and exciting. And that's what I think. But let's please not call each other demons, because I think it just basically engenders, makes people feel bad unnecessarily. And yes, we are open to free thoughts. So sometimes it's hard to see if you're on topic or off topic. Sometimes we can go off topic, but sometimes when we're going off topic, we're just going down a side avenue of a topic, because sometimes there's a rabbit hole matrix or network of connectivity in the the seeming reality of things that we're. Chaga. Chaga is that tobacco, am I right? That people snort.
That's
Yeah?
that's what's that called? Hape.
Oh, chape. So chaga, is that the form of DNT? Is that like what's the other one called? Chaga
Changa.
Changa. Is chaga another name for
Changa.
changa?
No, chaga is a mushroom.
Oh, okay. Right.
I think it's the one for the immune system, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Now I know. Now I remember. It's that small little mushroom, isn't it? That you can get, but you can't. I can't get it fresh here. All I can get is dried powders of it, from like health shops. But actually, a friend of mine uses that a lot. I haven't really used it much. I have taken some of these supplements at times. I generally tend to just try and keep my diet as simple as possible. Eat lots of like vegetables, try and stir fry my vegetables, not overcook them. Try and make sure I get a good intake of fruit, a good amount of leafy greens, a good amount of only Himalayan black salt. It's the only salt I eat. Don't eat other salt. And you know, I don't eat meat or fish or eggs or any of that stuff. So I try and make sure I wash my vegetables well. I try and soak them in the water before I use them. Certain things, like if it's potatoes and stuff that's been in the soil and it's probably absorbed a lot of toxin and poison, I might soak it in slightly warm water so that it can loosen up all of the chemicals, from the pesticides and hopefully suck some of it out. But other than that, I tend to be quite simple in what I take in. Obviously, try and take in enough water as well. I think that's really, really important. But interesting, our body, I think, can do a certain amount of transmutation. PK mentioned something interesting about these surveys and tests and, these things that they do in order to generate the so-called normality of nutrition, which is something I doubt. I'm lucky that my father was very pro-nutrition when I was a child. And so I've always eaten quite well. My mom was a vegetarian, so she had to eat a variety of foods. And because I've been a vegetarian my whole life, I've had to eat a variety of foods, because when you're a vegetarian, you can't be fussy, right? You got to eat full spectrum of all of the things that you need for your body in order to get all the nutrition. So I've just always learned not to be too fussy and to eat a wide variety of food. And it's kept me healthy. I think there's something in that. And try and eat as much food that's locally produced as possible, obviously. You know who was talking about chaga?
Louis was talking about.
Louis was talking about the chaga, of course. Yes, it's not the mushroom that I was thinking of, the Chinese one. This chaga is all over Canada. Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think we're getting towards the 4-hour point. I think we've had a good run at this. Is there anything else you want to add to the discussion, dear brother Indy? Or a list of things?
Yeah.
What have we not covered?
I'd like to say that Rupert Sheldrake has been doing some good work out in England, and panpsychism is being accepted there now as like a new religion of nature, the mind of nature. Nature has a mind. So it's kind of an integration of nature worship and science, but he also has ideas of like morphic resonance, where we're able to access thought fields through time with resonance to other people and creatures. It's all really fascinating stuff. So I feel like there's people that are breaking through the envelope of materialism. Some of that has to do with being able to see where the mind goes. Other people are seeing more where the energetic fields are corresponding with us that we don't see, and have instruments to test what the impacts those have that we're not really acknowledging yet. Like in Bruce Lipton's work in microbiology, he's showing how light has a strong effect on protein synthesis and of the cells. So the light that we expose ourselves to, we can use to synthesize proteins in our body and do all these things. And it's amazing. We have the breatharians that don't eat any food or drink any water, but are able to through concentration and meditation alone and some sun gazing, able to get all of the nutrients and water that they need to recycled from their brain through the palate of their mouth as divine nectar that they're able to then ingest and bring through their body perpetually in a cycle. So people have been able to transcend the bounds of limitation through the powers of the mind and with mind over matter techniques for as long as time, as long as history. So we know there's great power to the mind, and if we can start to understand those powers and start to integrate ways to explore the mind with the ways to explore the material realm and the physical body, I think we can come into a greater understanding, but through that integration. But it's important, I guess, for us to understand that there's two different aspects there that are both equally important in their own right.
Yeah, good old Rupert Sheldrake. He's been doing it for a long time. Huh? They tried to label him as a kook in the last 15, 20 years when he wasn't actually labeled as a kook before. He got a lot of positive. Originally, he got a lot of positive tilt for his. A lot of the other biologists liked his work, and then they all turned against him and sort of tried to label him as crazy. I think that's once again the cult of science turning against you, you know. But this panpsychism sounds like exactly, I think, what we've been sort of discussing. That all things are intelligent, that there's an intelligence in all things, even crystals are living beings, and all things are essentially alive, right? Because they've got sentience, just a different degree of sentience.
That parallels a lot with Shintoism, which I love, the idea that everything has a spirit. So,
and
it's all
Taoism and Chinese medicine says that our organs each have an intelligence, and they each have their own kind of mental structure and emotional structure.
Yeah.
So we could extrapolate that to each tissue has its own type of mental structure within the organs, and each organ has its own kind of mind. And so we can extrapolate that to like molecules, each having minds. And we can extrapolate that to the atoms that make up the molecules having minds, if that makes sense. And then we can break that down and say the electron's got a mind, and the proton and the nucleon, if this is accurate, have minds, and the quarks and the gluons, and they've got minds. So it's quite an interesting concept if you start to really extrapolate it, right? It sort of brings us back to like that God word, doesn't it? That there's like this fundamental intelligence that is expressed in every little thing that's alive, and everything is an expression of this fundamental intelligence, and that everything carries some trace element of this fundamental intelligence, which is the basis of all things. And we are an expression of this fundamental intelligence, and that we can attain to greater degrees of transmission of degrees of this greater intelligence from within us. We call this channeling, don't we?
We do. Powerful stuff. Well said.
Thank you. Yeah, man, the Rupert Sheldrake story is really good. For those that haven't found him, they really ought to go and look at his work. He's the first one that got me tuned into DNA. Like, because he's been doing it for a long time. And he was the first one who was explaining that DNA is vibrating. And I was like, wow. This was like years ago. I was like, wow. And he was like, there's a morphic field being generated by the DNA. And I was like, wow, what a concept. That's subspace. That's quantum entanglement. This is before, ether. Before we used the words quantum entanglement. I've always believed that ether was real. I never stopped believing. I was always a believer. I was like, one day they will prove. Do you know that I went to my school teachers and I told them about CERN in 89, 1990. And they told me it was conspiracy theory. Do you know when CERN was built?
In
Yes.
the 80s,
50s.
50s.
I think it's the 50s. Is it the 50s and 60s? I think it's the 50s. CERN
Didn't
built
hear about it till later now.
that. This is what I'm saying. 29th of September, 1954.
Whoa.
And when did we hear about it? The 90s. I read about it in some kind of scientific journals when I was young. Yeah.
Mhm.
Some kind of journals, because my mom's boyfriend Stuart had this beautiful library, and he used to get scientific journals, and he was very interested in that kind of thing. So I read it in one of his journals that he had. He had these
Mhm.
journals around the house. I pick one up and read it and go, wow, that's interesting. I went to talk to my teacher about it, and they said it wasn't real. So there's no such thing. This is like the cult of science, the indoctrination of science. When you go to your teacher and you talk to them about a real thing that exists in the world, and they tell you it's not real. They told me Tartaria wasn't real as well. I read about that in an encyclopedia. I was like, I couldn't believe the teacher. I said, no, I read about it in an encyclopedia. It's a very old encyclopedia, but it's still an encyclopedia. Why would they make up a whole chapter of a encyclopedia about the population dynamics, about the economics, about the military, about all the different aspects of it, like it's a country? Why would they do that? Who would go and do that in an encyclopedia? It just didn't make sense to me, And I came about it completely by accident, by the way, browsing through this antique encyclopedia that we had in the house. Well, it was part of a set. And Stuart had mentioned Tartaria at some point, my mom's ex. And I was like, oh, what is this Tartaria? Where is this? I've never heard about it. And I read about it, and I thought it was a real country until I went to school and they said it doesn't exist. I said, what do you mean it doesn't exist? That was like one of my first points where I was like, hold on, these people are full of shite. They're not making any sense to me because, doesn't add up. And then when I'd read about CERN, I went to my teachers and they said CERN doesn't exist. I said, yes, it does exist. And I explained to them what it was. In those days, it was an 800-meter long collider. Yeah. How long is it today? Is it 2.5 kilometers or something?
Not sure. Go look it up.
It's much bigger than it used to be, I think. Or was it 600 meters or 800 meters? It was like a third of the size of what it is when it was originally built. Obviously, the magnets were much weaker. Yeah, PK.
27 kilometers. Tunnel 17
How much?
kilometers.
17. Oh my gosh. When I first read about it, it was meters, hundreds of meters. How's that?
Man.
What a concept. Yeah, I think it was a few months ago that Louis was talking about 2 to 3 months ago. 2 months.
Yes. 50 to 175 meters on the ground.
This chromotherapy is very interesting. A good friend of my mom's, he provides laser technology for dentistry, and he is distributing equipment because he works in the medical industry and in the scientific industry, like providing laser type equipment for medicine. And the chromotherapy is a big thing that he's into. Speaking about like the difference of light. My mom even gave me a green bulb. Yeah, a green light bulb for that purpose. Maybe I should crank in a green light bulb and see how it looks. You could say I'm going green. So, what else is there you'd like to share, dear brother Indy, before we wrap this up? We've reached the last 10 minutes.
All right. Before we wrap this up, yeah, I'd like to thank Franklin, and like to thank everybody that was here on the roundtable today. Everybody in the audience and in the comments. Thanks to all you guys, and it's been a good discussion. I think there's definitely some obfuscation going on with science, trying to hide some of the stuff that's metaphysical and push it and separate the metaphysical and the materialistic schools of thought. And we need to try to reintegrate to gain a sense of the correlation between the metaphysical and the physical world. So thanks for everybody being here today, and we'll probably explore a lot more of this going forward. I'm interested about this chromotherapy stuff, so thanks for mentioning that, PK.
Yeah, I've just cranked in a green light bulb just because of it. The green
Cool.
color is particularly healing. Yeah. I mean, go figure, right? You go into nature, what color do you see mostly?
Green.
And which place heals you more than any other place? It's really a no-brainer. Yeah, and we don't have enough green in our world. We don't put enough green around, I think. I think we should be looking at colors more clearly because they want us to live in a gray world of red, russet, and concrete colors, which is interesting, and black tar and gray asphalt colors. But interesting, NASA buys helium for them. Yeah, you can imagine. One can imagine how much helium it takes. It's an interesting point. Welcome, Vaughan. Vaughn. Sending much love, peace, harmony, blessings. We will do a sequel to this, where we will look at marginal scientists. It's like, I think we're going to do a sequel to a lot of the talks that we've done, which will go into rabbit holes that are offshoots of many of the discussions, which is interesting. One of the next sequels we're probably going to, well, I don't know. I don't really plan them. They sort of come like normally 1 or 2 days before the actual discussion, 2 or 3 days. Sort of just tune into the vibrational field and feel what feels right, and then compare the feelings to the numbers and see how to present what that information will look like, if that makes sense. What kind of exploration of it. But I like the idea of looking at marginalized scientists throughout history, because I think it'll really show us a lot of just how much manipulation of knowledge there has been in our age. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. We're getting towards the 4-hour mark, and for the first time ever, we have managed to do a show in 4 hours. I am so stoked. That is impressive. Really happy. This is the goal, to do 4-hour shows, because 4-hour shows, actually the whole show gets to be on LinkedIn. And for those of you that aren't on LinkedIn, the streams onto LinkedIn as well. So I think LinkedIn is something we should be doing, because LinkedIn is like a really great, great platform. Those of you that aren't on LinkedIn, I think we should be. And so there is a link for LinkedIn. But yeah, man, if you guys want to find me on LinkedIn, it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. It's at Bush Whisperer. But basically, let me see if I can. Let's see if I can get a sense of this. Just keep trying to prompt me to sign in to this, which is really tricky. I don't know why it wants me to sign in. Why I should have to. Ach, no, man. Why is it doing this to me? There, it took me like 5 minutes to do something which is really simple. Sorry that took so long. But are you on are you on LinkedIn, by the way?
Yes, I'm on there.
What is your tag on LinkedIn?
I don't know. I get it in my email.
Send me a connection and we should connect on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well,
I think this LinkedIn is a great place to have these kind of conversations as well. You know,
cool.
because I think LinkedIn, you know, YouTube is what it is, right? Facebook is what it is. All these, but LinkedIn is like really a sort of a space for like people to ask questions and have discussions, if that makes sense. Because it's more of like it's a professional zone, isn't it? So that's interesting. I think there's definitely something there in the LinkedIn story. But yeah, brother, thank you for honoring us with your presence. I'm glad your mic and your camera worked in the end. I was a bit worried. Thought maybe your internet's crunching out. Gosh, sometimes the internet. Look at me with this green face. I must admit, I am actually enjoying this green light. Even though it's an LED, it's really made me feel much more chilled. And the other light bulb that I've got in there is it's yellow spectrum light, not blue. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, check your bulbs. Try and get like 3000 Kelvin or less. I think this one is it 2800 Kelvin. It's more of a yellowy orangey kind of a color bulb. If it says 6000 Kelvin on the bulb, it's very blue light, and that's really like dodgy. Bad news. Too much blue light, bad. All LED light, though, I'm guessing is bad. I'm not even going to pretend that it isn't. But I reckon that blue LED light is worse than other colors of LED light. Anyway, so much love to you. Thank you, dear brother Indy. God bless you. An honor having you on the show and your beautiful ideas and your equations and your philosophical mind. Love to all of you. Have an absolutely gorgeous and amazing day. Don't forget to smile. Life is short. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Blessed be.